Hello, hello.
Oh, shit. There he is.
Hey, we got it working. How you doing?
I love it. Oh, my God. That took forever. All right, we'll just put that there. Okay, beautiful. But is Destiny a stripper? It's very funny.
I try not to be. Okay, what do we got? Wait, can you be a little louder?
Yes, I'm here.
Yep, okay. And then one more time?
All right, I am here. I am here.
Okay,
We're going
cool.
to debate certain things about the world.
Gotcha, this is fine. Okay, cool.
We literally haven't even discussed what we're going to talk about.
Well, I mean, if part of what you wanted to defend was that Republicans can be intelligent people, so that right there probably gives us a boatload of issues we'll disagree on, so.
I forgot that I wrote you that, but yeah, that was the sort of pretty much the fundamental problem that I had with what you said. I mean, the biggest problem that I had with what you said.
Sure.
But I also wanted to sort of in general defend Lauren Southern.
Okay, that's, oof, we're starting off pretty heavy, but okay.
So, well, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because, so did you read the New York Times article? I assume you must have, because you were a big part of that.
Yeah, I think so. I've been familiar with this guy's story for quite a long time, so.
Caleb Kane, right. Yeah, so he posted this. For everybody who doesn't know, there's this guy, Caleb Kane, and he posted this video about how he had kind of gone a little bit, what he would call alt-light, which I'm not even really sure what his, like exactly what his mentality was at the point that he was right wing or whatever. But it looked like he was watching some kind of, if not white supremacist, white nationalist stuff.
Yeah, or like kind of alt-right nationalists or whatever. So people like Lauren Southern. Basically, you subscribe to all of the tenets of the alt-right, save for the Jewish conspiracy theory, which I don't think Lauren pushes, but.
I actually wouldn't. I would think that saying that Lauren Southern is alt-right, that to me sounds a little bit like a slur. Now, I don't know if she would subscribe to that, but I would imagine that she wouldn't.
Well, I mean, it depends on if you think that being racist is a slur or not, I guess. It depends on your ideology, what you would consider a slur.
Do you think Lauren Southern would consider herself to be racist?
No, but racists often don't, right? That's like it's part of the challenge of the conversation.
I suppose that depends on racism. I mean, you know, your definition of what racism is. But I also think that there is this presumption in the United States that you can deduce somebody being racist without them accepting it. And I don't think that's true. Well,
I mean, but that's really the only way you can ever find if someone is racist, right? Very rarely will somebody declare, or any idea for that matter.
You mean because they're secretly racist because the world is so hostile toward it?
Well, not only that, but I mean, we have to use inductive reasoning to ever arrive at the conclusion that someone is racist. I can't truly know. For instance, somebody could say, I love women, and then also say, I want all women to be stoned to death if they're adulterers, right? Or adulteresses, I guess. Like, how do I know if you're, a misogynistic person if you don't actually
I would
say
actually,
it?
in that particular hypothetical, I would presume that they were, in fact, not misogynistic, but rather they just hated adulteresses. A very specific subset of women.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, we could do, yeah.
There is this concept within Christianity of like hate the sin, love the sinner. Have you ever heard that?
I have heard of that concept, but at the end of the day, I mean, if we only evaluate people's, I guess, moral decisions with like relative to their own framework, then we kind of lose the ability to make any moral condemnation at all, right? Which kind of hurts our ability to have like a legal system, for instance, which presupposes a lot of morality. Like for instance, like almost nobody would call themselves like a racist or a misogynist or any other one of these derogatory terms because they're always going to have a good reason for why they believe the things they believe, right?
Somebody just asked if I was a normie. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but I'm relatively normal. Yeah, you definitely have to set certain standards and then, I suppose, determine whether or not people in society have, broken the rules, right? The problem with something like racism is there's no law against racism.
Yeah, of course not. But we're not talking about laws against racism. We're just curious, like, I'm generally interested in knowing if a person is racist because it's going to shade the way that they view a lot of things, and it's going to possibly poison a lot of the kind of ideas they have. Like, if I
actually agree with you 100%, and that's actually why I, in some ways, I think that we need to make society freer. I guess liberate people to express themselves a little bit more clearly. And I don't mean to say we shouldn't have some kind of social pressure against racism. I think that we should. But there is a certain thing like, okay, there are certain laws in place where, you can't be racist in terms of your like employment habits and stuff like that. I think you should be able to be. That sounds really cruel, but look, if you have a racist employer and he becomes known as a racist employer, and he certainly is, clearly is, because he won't hire black people or something like that. I think people have a right to know that. Under the current system, a lot of that gets hidden for legal reasons.
Yeah, but what do you do then when you get a system that starts to self-perpetuate? So you have a district full of people that only hire white people, and then black people can never live there, and then the racism is entrenched there, and it becomes cyclical.
That is a completely different world.
Well, no, that's the world of the United States with Jim Crow laws, like literally 60 years ago.
Precisely right. It's a different time, right? So it's essentially a fictional version of our world today, or...
I don't know if you can say something historical that our parents lived through is a fictional version of our world today. I mean, it's pretty real, and there are still a lot of people that demonstrate these types of racist forms of thought. For instance, when it comes to hiring people, black people tend to be discriminated against more than white people based on name alone.
I'm always skeptical of those studies.
I mean, they're pretty well accepted in the academic world. Like, what this is a huge...
So you're talking about people like, with like a name that's discernibly black or discernibly white.
Yeah.
But the only people that are discernibly black are named like African names or like Shaniqua, like weird made up names.
Firstly, hold on. Firstly, all names are made up, right? That's like, names aren't a feature of the world. We wouldn't discover it.
Well, how do I express it in a way that...
So firstly, all names are made up. So like so I'm not going to pin you down on anything, mainly because I don't care. It's boring to me. But like what you just said was...
on that point.
What you just said was like unintentionally... What you just said was unintentionally racist.
Right? Sure. It's not unintentionally racist.
It is, though. You're basically saying, like, your name is fake. Shaniqua, that's not a real name. Well, of course it is. Every name is equally fake and equally real.
You understand what I mean. It's not common, right? It's not a common name. It's like a name that somebody decided this sounds unique and interesting. So a lot of the times when somebody looks at a name like that, they're not looking necessarily at race. They're looking at class. Right? So if you're looking at in an application, the guy's name's Randy, I'm going to think this guy might be a redneck.
But on the applications that they submitted for these people in this study, this is like one of the most wide-read like studies of all time when it comes to studying this. Like they controlled for things like that. Like the applications were identical, save they swapped the names. So the background and everything was exactly the same in terms of what was on the application.
No. I understand what you're saying. I understand the whole concept, but the assumption is that people looked at a name, saw it was black, and thought, okay, I don't want to hire this person. But it's very possible that person saw a name and they thought that it was like a lower class name, right? I mean, I think most people are more classist than they are racist. So you would say, okay, if I'm going to hire this redneck or I'm going to hire this like guy from the hood, right? There isn't a huge difference to me.
Yeah, so like you're making... I don't know. I'm really not trying to like get you or anything, but you're making arguments to be racist. Like that's what you're doing. You're saying, like,
I'm absolutely not.
This is the equivalent. This is
used as an excuse, but
this is the equivalent of me saying, like, I want to hire somebody to do a job, but I'm not going to hire anybody with boobs at all. And then somebody's like, well, hold on, isn't that kind of sexist? And you're like, whoa, wait, hold on, no. I just said I'm not going to hire people with boobs. If those people tend to be women, well, I mean, that's not my problem, right? You're basically saying that, like, well, maybe I just see a name.
You're assuming that every single black person is poor.
No, that's what you're assuming. You're telling me that if you see a name like Tyrone, you would instantly, or not you, but seeing the name Tyrone gives you the instant association of lower class. Therefore, you're not going to hire that person. That's like a racial effect. Like that's like discrimination based on name and race alone.
It depends on region. Because if I did that in Portland, Oregon, right? If I saw a black name in Portland, Oregon, I would not, because I'm from Oregon, I would never assume that they were poor.
That's good for you, but that's not what the outcome of the study was, right? I mean, maybe you yourself.
Right. But if I saw the name Randy, I would assume that the person was poor. And if I was specifically looking for somebody who came from sort of like wealth, because I had some kind of class bias, I might be preferential to Tyrone rather than Randy on name alone. And that has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with class.
Sure. Okay. But do you agree that it's a problem for if you're a black person in the United States, you're trying to get a job and people instantaneously associate your name with being lower class? Do you think that might be like a problem?
Huge problem. And I would say that class bias is hugely problematic, period. But the only problem with class bias is it's never going to go away because there is always going to be a natural assumption that somebody from a lower class has a poorer education and is less intelligent, and that's just always going to be true. And I'm not sure how you could ever overcome that.
Are you? I'm just curious, just so I have an idea. Are you a socialist or a Marxist?
Oh, no, no, no.
Okay,
No,
you're
definitely.
you're giving me like a very heavy Marxist interpretation of how society is structured. The idea that everything revolves around class and everything is ultimately reducible to class is a very Marxist way of looking at society. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but like,
No, I don't think that I would say everything is reducible to class. I'm talking about this very specific study.
okay, but in this very specific study where people's names are discriminated against that are black names, you're telling me, well, the racism part isn't important. We're going to reduce it to class. That's like a very Marxist thing to do.
I don't think so. I think that it's you could interpret it either way. I'm not saying there were no racists in the study. Like if you went through and you looked at the people who were doing the hiring, you would never find a racist. I'm sure that you could. But I also think that you would find a lot of people who just thought this person seemed lower class. And that has, sometimes that might be associated with race in certain regions. And like that's just maybe a problem with societal structure. The way our society happens to be.
Sure, I understand that.
Lined up.
So I'm curious, don't you think that it's possible that if I run with this line of thought, that you're setting a bar that is so impossible to pass that literally nobody could be racist? So for instance, let's say I went to hire somebody and now I had physical appearances that I could look at and I saw a white person and a black person, and then the person said, well, I've heard that black people commit more crime, so I'm not going to hire the black person just because he might be violent at the workplace. Do you think that might be racist, or do you think that's a fair assessment as well?
I think that's actually a pretty fair assessment. It's not, it's sort of like you would want everyone to judge everybody on their individual characteristics, right? But if somebody is privy to data that is accurate, and they are discriminating against people based on that data, that's a natural thing for people to do. It's unfortunate if the data is not in the favor of the person that you're talking about.
So do you think it's fair when you're doing an interview process where you're trying to singularly assess the qualifications of somebody? So for instance, you're not looking at the average educational attainment in the US. You're not looking at the average job experience in the US. You're looking at one applicant. Why would you apply the average criminality onto an individual when you're looking at specifics and every other qualifying thing?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I would try not to, right? I would try not to.
Well, yeah, but sorry, go ahead.
The thing that I'm trying to express is that I think that it's natural for people to tend to do that.
Well, yeah, but this is a vacuous statement. It's natural for people sometimes to rape or murder people. That's not a good argument. That's not a moral defense of an action, right?
I do think that there is, with the definition of racism is like very tricky, because there are two kind of ideas with regard to race. Well, there's several ideas, definitions, but there's a broad definition and there's a strict definition. And my idea is a hatred or a thinking that a particular group is inferior.
Don't you think thinking that they might be a lower class or a criminal by default, don't you think those two things are forms of inferiority?
I wouldn't say that people think that it's default. I think that it would be something that they would suspect because that might be true.
What's the difference between that and default? Like, what's the difference between what you just said and what I just said? So
Because
I assume that all black...
There's an assumption that the person is that way, and there's a suspicion that somebody's that way.
What, an assumption and a suspicion, these are like synonyms, right? Like, what's the difference?
No. To assume is to say, okay, like I see that you're sitting in front of a computer, with headphones on, doing a YouTube channel. I see you have like gamer stuff going on or whatever. You must be a loser, right? You must be a loser. I just start to treat you like a loser. I talk to you like you're a nerd. I don't have like the respect for you that I would have with somebody that I would imagine that would be more social. Or I could say, I suspect this person might have nerdy tendencies. Let's explore that by, investigating or talking to the person. It's like a hypothesis that you're then trying to explore as opposed to just an assumption about the person, right? Okay. And look, none of these things are particularly good that we do this all the time. Sometimes you make assumptions about people and you're totally wrong, right? Like look at America's Got Talent. That happens all the time.
Yeah, but we're talking about like literally hiring or not hiring somebody based on, and I don't know if you would use assumption or a suspicion that doesn't necessarily pertain to that person. When the goal of an interview is to like ascertain the qualifications of an individual, you're trying to apply like a class's status onto that person.
I would say that that assumptions would be racist and that suspicions would be natural.
So if somebody were to apply for a job and their background was fine, everything's great, but they were black and you had a suspicion they might become violent, that's fair game?
Well, that's a tricky
well, that's what the position you're defending, right?
Here's why that's really tricky, because statistically speaking, you would naturally, somebody who had all the statistics and understood what was going on in America, they might make that, they might jump to that, they might be suspicious about that.
I'm trying to pull you out because you're fuck. I'm not trying to do this. I swear to God.
No, you can try to make me look as
no,
bad
I'm
as
not
you
trying
want,
to.
man.
I
I'm
swear to
good.
God, I'm not. But you're giving me line by line, like you're giving me like the justifications for like statistical racism, and it doesn't hold up. I promise you.
Yeah, no.
Like, when you say something
like,
like I have the statistics in front of me, I can then make a judgment about this individual black person. You're not doing that about any other
judgment. You can't make a judgment.
Or have a suspicion, like regardless.
Having
Like
a suspicion is fine.
But it's
Having
not
a
if you use that to
suspicion is fine.
determine whether or not you hire somebody. If everybody does that based on race, that's not good.
Listen. If I go into like a hip hop producer's office, right, and I say, listen, I'd like a job working for you, and this guy's like, well, okay, this guy does not probably have any knowledge about hip hop. He's super lame, like he's super white. He probably has no idea about the culture. And then I come out with all these obscure references, and I know what I'm doing, and I even get on the mic, and I'm like a magnificent hip hop artist, which is not true at all. But let's pretend that that's true. His suspicion when I walked in the door was like disproven. But he had a natural suspicion based on it doesn't necessarily have to just be statistics. It could be your life experience. People have natural tendencies to believe certain things for a variety of reasons other than just hating a group or thinking that they're inferior.
Okay, so I mean, I would say that's a form of racism if a guy makes that assumption like right off the bat. I mean, like I guess
let me just qualify everything that I'm saying so that we can kind of get more on the same page, because I actually don't think we disagree about this that much.
I'm not sure, but okay.
I do think that a white supremacist would make a lot of these kinds of arguments, or a white nationalist or something like that, right? Of somebody who is genuinely hateful in order to justify what they're saying. That doesn't make them untrue. And I think that a lot of the problem we have in America is that people are extremely reticent to accept certain things that are accurate or are real, because that they don't want to be aligned with these sort of white supremacist or white nationalist types because they make similar arguments, right? A white nationalist can make an argument that totally makes sense, and then he could jump to the conclusion, well, we need to get rid of Mexicans and put them back in Mexico, right? Or we need to get rid of Muslims and put them all back in Muslim countries, right?
Sure,
which is a lot of what people say.
Yeah.
I have no interest, listen, if I had to get rid of all the people that weren't white in America, I would have almost no friends. Like, it would be horrible for me, right? The color of a person to me is, completely irrelevant in terms of their value.
Okay, that's great. I don't care about you in particular, though, right? I don't, like I said, I don't know whether or not you are or aren't racist. It's not even relevant to this for either of us. And I do agree that like a white supremacist,
a non-racist person can look at the data and look at human responses to data and have a perfectly valid, rational response to it.
But a valid, rational response to a black person, being interviewed isn't, this guy might just turn violent because I know the criminal data on how many blacks have been incarcerated. That's not like a valid.
I don't think that's particularly rational. To me, that kind of stereotyping is not necessarily rational. But I think for some people who are particularly sensitive to that kind of thing, it might be rational. Let's say that a woman was raped by a black guy.
Rationality isn't defined by the observer. That's the whole point of rationality. We should have like an objective, like third-party frame of reference by which we can analyze things.
Let's say a girl was raped by a black guy. She looked into the data. She saw the crime rates, and she was just naturally, afraid when she ran into a black guy. Now she was working toward, not jumping to conclusions because that she understood that obviously not every black guy she was going to run into was going to rape her, but she had that sort of conditioned response. I mean, I can't sit here and say that woman's a racist because she has that conditioned response. That's her experience informing her suspicions about people.
Well, I mean, we could say she's a racist, absolutely. Now, obviously, this is a very emotional example. But sure, we absolutely could. But firstly, that's a much different experience, though, in terms of you personally dealing. So, for instance, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell somebody you need to, have black friends or you need to have Mexican friends. But if you're in charge of like interviewing people and you've got like a huge grudge against a certain race for whatever reason, you probably shouldn't be in charge of like interviewing and hiring people, right?
But everybody is a huge grudge is kind of, how do you figure out how objective people are? Everybody has.
Well, I mean, if somebody says they've been raped by a black person and then they have like a grudge against black people.
I don't know if that's going to be broadcast to everybody in the workplace.
Okay, well, so like here's a question then, because this is ultimately like what we're getting at the meat of this, right? And this is what I'm genuinely curious. What would an interviewer have to do in your eyes to actually be racist?
An interview?
So like somebody in charge of hiring, what would they have to actually do to be considered racist and under the framework you're working with?
To me, that is a very delicate I haven't really thought too much about that, I'll be honest. So that, okay,
Don't
I'll
you
give you a
think
point there because I haven't thought about it. But I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. I think that unless somebody is willing to say that they think that a race is inferior or that they hate a particular group, you should give them the benefit of the doubt. I think that you'd be very hard. To me, it's too often do we jump to the conclusion of racism. I think that there are so many other isms out there. Classism. I always say, like, I used to work at well, it doesn't matter, but I used to talk to some guys about this, and we kind of all came to the conclusion that the race that has it the worst. It's not the black people. It's not white people. It's not Hispanics or Islamic country, Arabs or whatever. It's ugly people. Right?
Okay, sure. Well, before we jump onto the black pill train, okay, so just so that I can understand, summarizing our positions
black
here.
pill train.
It's
Hopelessness.
It's an online meme.
Yeah, I know what black pill. I actually looked up yesterday.
Okay.
But listen,
So
I
you're
would say,
saying-
let me just
Yeah,
finish this idea.
Go for it. Yeah.
I do think that ugly people have it the worst.
Okay.
If you're somebody who's like particularly ugly, people are going to be biased against you. Black, white, Hispanic, whatever. If you're a very good-looking person, you're a black guy in a nice suit, clean haircut, great attitude, speaks well. I mean, gosh, everybody's going to want to hire you. If you're Mexican, same thing. If you're Muslim, nobody really cares about that stuff anymore in America. We care that you are charming and eloquent and a delightful human being. I honestly, if you're,
I really think you should look into Marxism, dude.
Guy,
I think you would love reduction of every issue to class. I think you should really look into it because you're hardcore pushing that narrative. And
I'm very well versed in the ideas behind socialism, and just look. I don't think class is necessarily a bad thing.
Okay. Well, so before we move on to this here, just to summarize our previous discussion. So you would say that it is unreasonable to assume that somebody can be racist without them literally declaring, "I hate X group of people" or "I am racist."
Of course, it's possible.
Wait. Okay. So if it is possible, how would you go about inductively reasoning that out? What kind of pieces of evidence would you gather to see if somebody might be racist?
Well, like I said, I haven't really thought about that. I mean, I would have to give that point up to you that to me, it would be a very difficult thing to assume. Now, there are certain things that you can assume, based on what people say and how they act. Like if they say the N-word a lot, I think it'd be difficult to imagine. Although there are people who do that just to be provocative. I think Owen Benjamin says the N-word a lot just to be provocative. But
so you would say somebody like Owen Benjamin is not a racist?
I literally know nothing about Owen Benjamin.
Okay, because he has a video where he literally said that if he had to choose a doctor, he would never go with a black doctor over a white doctor because he would be too scared the black doctor would kill him.
Actually, I understand that completely.
Do you think that's a racist sentiment?
100% no. I think that is a sentiment. And listen, I worked for a black doctor, and he was an awesome guy, and I loved him to death. He's an amazing guy. Works in Beverly Hills. He went to school at Harvard. He grew up in Beverly Hills. He went to Beverly Hills High School. Great guy. Love him to death. But in general, if you don't know who the doctor is, if you don't know him personally, and you just see that they're black, right? Because of affirmative action really screwed over good black doctors. I mean, look at Ben Carson, like one of the best brain surgeons in the world. Genius. But because of affirmative action, they're held to a different standard. Black people are held to a different standard than everybody else, a lower standard.
Do you think that there are doctors that pass med school that otherwise wouldn't because affirmative action somehow gives them better grades?
I think that what happens is that people suspect that maybe these people look. I don't actually know how.
You can't get through med school on affirmative action. There's not like a grade.
But you can
grant.
get through med school with flying colors, and you can scrape by, just like everything else.
Yeah, but you know what they call the worst white doctor that graduates from a college? A doctor. As long as you pass, you pass. Okay, whether you're the best or the worst.
That doesn't alleviate people's fears, their perceptions.
You're giving me a million different reasons why people can be racist. You're saying
it's not about being racist. Look,
you're talking about judging a doctor's capabilities just based on the color of his skin. How is that not racism?
It's not based on the color of his skin. It's based on the system that judges him by the color of his skin. Okay. I am critical of the system that judges him by the color of his skin. I say let him into med school at the same standard as everybody else, right? And to be honest, I don't even know if med schools enact affirmative action in the same way that other kinds of groups do. But if you're going to hire an engineer and you're going to think, okay, I know that affirmative action, let this guy into college. How much more likely are you to think, okay, I'm suspicious that guy maybe isn't as qualified as it looks like from his whatever application. It's a problem with the system. It's not that look, could give two craps what the color is of the guy who's making the bridge.
Yep.
If
Real
he's
quick,
like
okay, just because I
off.
noticed this is happening. Okay, I don't care about what you personally would do. Like, because we're
No,
always
but
going to retreat
it's
to
relevant.
like,
It's relevant because you
well,
can
but
abstract that to everyone.
But it's not relevant, right? Because like because there are two possibilities. I'm not accusing you of doing this, but like if you were lying to me, you would make up anecdotes, or if I was lying to you, I would make up anecdotes, right? I'm always going to say, well, listen, I've got 20 Asian friends, I've got 20 black friends. I would never do this
listen.
argument, but
Every time I say me,
every
time I say me, it's just an illustration. It's like a hypothetical. It's an illustration of how I think most people think, most white people think in America.
Okay.
Well, let me ask you a question real quick. In real life, how many genuinely like self-avowed racists do you know personally?
Like,
and you do this job, so it's possible you've met some since.
When you say
this.
personally, you mean like they're my friends or just people I've talked to, or
in real life, run into in real life, met, spent an hour with, anything?
I have no idea. I'm pretty antisocial. I stay inside, or I go to like conferences to talk to like my business people. Like I don't.
Okay, I asked this question to tons of people. There are certain regions in which you will find people who are like, oh yeah, I know racists, like Detroit, and certain places where you have like a large sort of contrasting populations, like I think maybe like Baltimore, places like that. Mainly in the Midwest and some places in the South, you'll find people who go, oh yeah, I've met racists. But even those people are like, only like a couple. And to me, it's like, okay, if I'm white and I'm going around the country and I meet people and I know people that run businesses, and literally no one, I've never met a racist in my life. I've heard people say racist things online. I've never actually been in the presence of a racist and communicated with them and, enjoyed a conversation or anything. If I've met zero and I'm 39 years old, by the way, this is not a symbol of any kind. That's the symbol for zero. If I've met zero, how many can there be? It's not like this epidemic that CNN thinks that there is. You have such a pessimistic view of white people. And I actually think, this is kind of a rough thing to say, but I think people like you actually make the black population stay down, right? Because you say white people are racist and they won't give you a shot. And certain people are like, okay, I have the decision to go to school or the decision to go sling drugs. Well, if I go to school, even if I get good grades, I probably won't get let into college because white people don't like me. And even if I do, then they're not going to give me a job. So, F it, I'm going to go sling drugs. And it's like, no, don't put invisible blockades in front of people like white people are effing racist and the system needs to change, because everybody will just use that as an excuse. Like the reason I haven't been able to succeed in my life, any shortcoming of the black population, we say, oh, it's because of white racism. And it does not help the black population. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, I don't even know where to start. The idea that, I mean, I'm familiar with this. This is kind of a humorous argument, the bigotry of low expectations. I mean, we can go into that if you want. It's really boring and it's really vacuous.
All right. Well, let's step back.
No. Okay. Well, hold on, because you just monologued for like 12 minutes. Okay.
I did. Sorry. Well, it wasn't.
Yeah, so like
maybe a minute.
No, that's okay. I understand, but like, I mean, I have to respond, right? Like,
Sure.
like the frustration is that like with people like you, and I don't know you well enough, but it's
me.
Yeah, people like you, is that you might not be racist, you might be well-intentioned, you might be whatever. I'm not familiar enough with you to know, but it's really frustrating, I guess, when there is a whole bunch of damaging or harmful racist behavior that exists in society, but people of these types of arguments literally set like an impossibly high standard that not even 90% of real racists would actually meet to actually conclude whether or not somebody's behavior is racist. Like, you've essentially defended the idea that I could say I don't want a doctor because he's black, or I don't want to hire a black applicant even though they're totally qualified because maybe they're poor because their name is Tyrone, or maybe they're going to hurt somebody because they're black and I know that black people go to jail. Like, if you're unironically defending like some of the most racist positions a person can hold, I don't even know where we're going to be at when we get into like criminal justice or things where other forms of like institutionalized racism aren't just feelings that white people have, but numbers that are hardcore documented and backed and shown time and time again.
Okay. So let me throw this back here real quick, because you keep saying that every sort of defense of what you would call a racist, idea is just a defense of racism. So I would just throw this back to you and say, because I'll accept that sometimes that would be like an excuse for racism.
Okay.
I'll accept that. I'll agree with you. I don't think it's common, but I think that it's possible. And I'll throw it back to you and say, are there any instances where a person could be suspicious of a black person and you think that it's not racist?
I mean, anytime you're taking the status of an entire class of people and you're taking an average and applying it to an individual, you're engaging in a form of I mean, in this particular case, it'd be racism. Yeah.
Okay, so you can never excuse it. If anybody has any kind of presumptions about anyone based on skin color, it's always racism.
I mean, generally, outside of like maybe very extreme examples, like, yeah, when we're talking about like interviewing somebody for a job or something like that, yeah, it's inappropriate to apply like an average, like a class of statistics or whatever onto a single person. That's not one, it's not rational. It's not even good for business if you're trying to operate efficiently in a capitalist system. And two, yeah, it's irrational by definition. Like, it is the definition of irrationality.
I would actually agree that it's irrational, but let's look at another example, like the way somebody dresses, right?
Okay.
Say you have to hire somebody for a very important job, and this person, like somebody comes in impeccably dressed, like perfect.
Okay.
Like the suit's very expensive. Clearly, you know the brand or whatever, and the guy comes in. Will you not then have certain expectations about that person based on their appearance?
For sure.
But that's not, I mean, like, why is that? That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just
why is that? Wait, were you going to ask me what is the difference between the type of clothing somebody chooses to wear versus the skin color they're born into? Because we can go into the differences of that if you want. Like,
that's not really, no, that's not really the comparison I'm making.
But that is absolutely the comparison you just made.
I'm really making a comparison. I'm just trying to say that aesthetics will influence a person. Like
the aesthetic of being black or white.
The aesthetic. If you have a very specific knowledge about a group, it will necessarily influence you.
It shouldn't, though. I'm telling you that you just agreed with me. That's irrational.
I actually agree that in most, especially with regard to race, it shouldn't matter as much as I think that sometimes it does.
So if we can agree that it's irrational and probably detrimental to society, it's probably something we should get rid of. We don't want this.
Look, I actually agree that it's not only unethical, but it's harmful to your company as well as being detrimental to society. Like, you want to be able to hire the best people no matter what, right? It shouldn't matter to you what color people are or whatever. I hold it, there's like a very different standard, I think, that you have than what I have in terms of what I would call a racist idea. Right? I just wouldn't say that anybody who perceives anybody as, if I look at somebody and I see that he's relatively skinny and in good shape, I'm probably going to assume that they're good at sports. They might be terrible at sports, but that just might be.
Okay, hold on. Because you're talking yourself into a hole. Okay, so the problem is that
I'm really not. Really not.
I know it feels like you're not, but like the analogies that you're using are indicative of your underlying thoughts that you're trying really hard to hide. I'm not trying to accuse you of this, but for instance, when we talk about real quick, when we talk about somebody's skin color, this is an intrinsic property of somebody that they cannot change. But when you keep trying to illustrate this by way of example using something else, you're picking things that people do have control over. Like, okay, well, I can discriminate against somebody for the type of.
Good point. Somebody's made a good point on here. They just said, okay, we just keep talking about hiring people for jobs. But what about a general presumption about anybody ever? Can you never look at anybody and make any presumptions based on their race ever about anything?
I mean, there are obviously some heuristics that we have for people that we, function with in our daily lives. And I mean, that's probably acceptable on an individual level. I don't think everybody can be like a perfect arbiter of rationality and whatnot. Sure. But like when it's coming to making.
This is the kind of thing I'm trying to forgive.
No, but that's not what we were talking about. We were talking about hiring people for jobs. That's far different than I walk into a bar and maybe I feel more comfortable sitting with the other Asian people rather than the black people, right? That's way different than I'm making a hiring for a job or I'm deciding what kind of doctor I want, right? These are two totally different types of decisions in society. One can be far more harmful than the other.
I also have this idea that people have a familiarity bias.
Of course they do, sure.
And I don't think that this is specifically, I don't think this is racism.
Well, but it is. Like, this familiarity bias, for instance, you're talking about disappears. This is a well-documented effect that when people live in cities that have, like, more diverse people around them, they have better attitudes towards those other groups of people as well. Like, this is pretty well-documented in psychology. We could Google Scholar a bunch of studies that the more time you spend around different people, different skin colors, the more friendly you are towards those types of people.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. But it's not just that. I think that when you grow up with parents that look something like you and they take care of you, hopefully, you feel more comfortable around people who look like that because you've been conditioned to believe people like that will be nice to you and take care of you. And people, the further away people appear to be, you're going to have a sort of a natural distrust of those people. And I think that that's ingrained through evolution, like, thousands of years ago.
We're granted some of this genetically. We're probably predisposed to it. But like socially, we reprogram a ton of this type of stuff, right? So
you're 100% right. And white people generally, and you can tell me if this is not true in your case, but when I was growing up, pretty much every single year at school, it was like anti-racist, brainwashing. And actually I appreciate it because I think that they should teach that. I think they should teach.
I'm just curious. What do you mean by that phrase, anti-racist brainwashing? Like they're brainwashing people to not be racist? Is that?
Yeah, it's basically like racism is like the most evil thing in the world, right? And to be perfectly honest, I don't think that that was a bad thing that they did. I think that they should teach people not to judge people on, don't judge people on the color of their skin, judge them on the content of the character. I love that sentiment. I'm glad that people instilled that ethic into my brain. Okay. But like, your assumption is that like somehow that's not universally applied in America, and that secretly there's a bunch of people with like Klan robes in their closet.
Not Klan robes, but again, like, I guess the bar that you set for being racist is so unimaginably high, like, short of like killing a black person or declaring you're about to do so, you can't be considered racist in your system. It's like really hard, I guess, to understand. Or no, I mean, I guess I understand.
It's just wear suits and.
I mean, like, your system is very frustrating to work with, because I don't believe that it like comports to what is real very often.
Okay, I would say this. Like, okay, I'll give you an example of something that I would think if a black person came in to interview for me, or a white person came in to interview for me, right? So if I saw a white person come in to interview for me and he looked like a typical white guy that that I would meet back home in Oregon or something like that, I would think that it's going to be pretty easy for me to connect with this person, because I grew up in similar circumstances, that sort of thing. If a black guy comes in to the room, I might think, okay, we might come from like a different background. I might have to try harder to connect to this guy, right? Now, I don't think that that's a racist presumption. I don't think I dislike the guy necessarily, or I think little of him. I just might think we might not come from the same culture. I might not, connect to him as easily. Let's find out, right? That's a suspicion that I have about the guy, that he didn't grow up in my culture. Now, what if the guy turns out to be more like me than the white guy? We're like cracking each other up. The guy's hilarious. I love the guy. I end up hiring the guy. Now, did my suspicion of him coming from a different culture than me, was that a racist suspicion?
I mean, I guess in this particular circumstance, it's not necessarily horrible, but like, what if you had to choose? What if you had to choose between like a black guy from Oregon versus, or do you live in Portland or whatever? Or you don't have to say, I guess.
I was from Salem originally, but
okay, if it was a black guy from like Portland, Oregon versus like a white guy from like Alabama, which person do you think you would have more in common with? Like, would you instantly just still assume it's the white person, or?
No, I would definitely assume it's the black guy.
Okay.
But that's just me. And again, it's irrelevant because it's but okay, let me ask you a couple things that I wrote down, because I legitimately want to ask you a few things about like the New York Times article. Mm-hmm. What was your take? I mean, did you read the article, the New York Times article?
I've read so much stuff like it. I think I glanced a couple paragraphs, but I think I have the gist of it. You can link it to me.
You didn't read it, because it was like, I mean, I don't remember it naming you specifically, but in his video, he does name you specifically.
Yeah, I've talked to the guy before, yeah.
And he talks about that Lauren Southern debate being the thing, because he was like, that Lauren Southern debate blew my mind, because Destiny didn't just beat her, he destroyed her. He destroyed her.
Yeah, she uttered some of the dumbest things I think I've ever heard in my entire life in that conversation, yeah.
Okay, look, I will grant you that I think at least the first half of that conversation, you definitely seemed to be winning. And I think a big part of that was her making a kind of a metaphor out of a video game that I've never played. But
well, the problem was she started off with a concrete argument like immigration's impact on economics, and empirically she is absolutely devastated. And any conservative or libertarian that claims to be opposed to immigration because of economics is totally uninformed on the literature right now. So she abandoned that immediately.
I don't think that's actually accurate. I'll defend her a little bit on that.
Sure.
I've read a few articles on this. I haven't. It's almost impossible to find a consensus on the numbers.
It is absolutely possible to find a consensus. The most pro or the most anti quote unquote immigration scholar that you could find, Borjas himself, won't.
Yeah, I read that article that you guys were talking about in the
sure, interview. Or we can go through any number of papers or whatever. Like, it's just the idea that immigration is like a boon to your economy is like it's like a foundational to capitalism. Like, I mean, it absolutely is.
I like that article because it actually defined the net gain that you're talking about. It defined this as not only a net gain, but also a strong shift, right? A shift in where the money is, right? So the people that lose out are the people that are most vulnerable, right? So poor people lose out. Some of the immigrants that come in gain, and then like businesses gain, like rich people gain. Mm-hmm. And that's really, that kind of wealth distribution is so antithetical to anything that the left wants that it's bizarre that they want to bring in more immigrants, or not just immigrants generally, but specifically low wage, low skill immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, you would address this with your tax policy, sure. The left also typically advocates for higher taxation.
No, I have a slightly different position than her in that I don't really think that the idea of immigration is altogether bad. Right. I mean, immigration is like, you're going to want to bring in people where you need people. right? But the immigration system, I think Trump changed this a little bit, but the immigration system as we had it for a long time was kind of random. It really did not take into account our places of need in terms of bringing in immigrants. What else do I want to ask you? Okay.
I mean, even among like low-skilled immigrants, like there's decent like economic consensus that these are beneficial to the average U.S. citizen, like even with low-skilled workers.
So if it's a benefit to the economy in general, but the only person that's benefiting is like Bill Gates. Like let's say Bill Gates makes $1 billion off of this immigration thing, and to the net economy we make money, but like pretty much everyone else in the country loses. That's not positive. You can't just look at the net gain.
I absolutely agree. I'm very curious what your position is on the Trump tax cuts that supposedly grew the GDP, but how most of those winnings were distributed to the people that were the wealthiest, because that's who those tax cuts targeted as well. What do you feel about that?
Well, there's absolutely a disagreement amongst various economists as to who benefited from
There's
that.
not. There's not a disagreement.
Oh, there
that is
absolutely
absurd.
is. Come on, I've looked at several articles about this. Some people think, okay, yeah, it definitely helped the middle class. Other people are like, oh no, it only helped rich people. The left's, the progressive position on this is that it only ever helped rich people ever. And but then you would look, you can read tons of articles that say, oh no, the middle class definitely benefited.
I mean, I'm trying to think of how much of a dick I want to be. Because I'm 100. I know. Because I know you're wrong. Typically, from most of the stuff that I read, the idea was that there was a very minor short-term impact, but other than that, there was almost no growth at all, and most of the winnings went to corporations and to the wealthiest people. And then even companies were using it in terms of like stock buyback as opposed to capital investment.
I've read so many dissenting opinions on this that it unless we like you and I went onto the internet and just started looking up articles to throw at each other like we're it would just be silly. Like the reality is there's a lot of people that disagree with you. And stating this as fact, I think is like kind of dangerous. It's very disingenuous. I don't think so many people, have crunched the numbers and have seen, this has benefited the middle class. It's a hard thing to argue because it's just going to be.
So what you just said was a very common way of disingenuously framing it, that the tax cuts did benefit the middle class, because they did, but that's not the argument. The argument is that they disproportionately benefited the upper class, which they absolutely did.
But that's fine.
Oh, well then
wait.
Works. I agree. Then what's your problem with immigration if it disproportionately benefits the people on top?
What's my because I think that it actually hurts people.
But it
whereas
doesn't.
The tax cuts didn't hurt anybody.
Well, I mean, it increases the size of our federal deficit. I guess depending on how you feel about, I guess, monetary policy, that might be another conversation to have. But I mean, it grows.
Well, the monetary thing is difficult because I tried to read as much as I could on this, and it was, the numbers differ from economist to economist. It's very, very difficult to get down to like.
We have a huge budget deficit. Not largely, but also because of the huge tax cuts. We cut more from our tax receipts than we did in our spending. Therefore, the budget deficit and then our overall deficit grows. Our debt grows. I mean,
I mean, to me, like that's an issue. The deficit and the debt. That's an issue that we could talk about for hours and try to figure out how to. I don't think you and I are prepared to solve the debt and deficit.
It's not about solving it. It's just interesting to me that Republicans are insanely critical about like people like Obama doing things like Keynesian economics and deficit spending, but literally the argument in favor of tax cuts given by Trump are Keynesian arguments. Well, if we just, the velocity of money in the economy, we'll just throw a bunch in, and who cares if we grow our national debt to fund our crazy deficits? Like that's essentially what Trump did, is deficit spending.
Well, there's always this idea that you can increase the debt a little bit, or increase the deficit a little bit temporarily, and then that'll have a better long-term effect, and because it'll grow the GDP and all this kind of stuff. I don't know enough about that kind of macroeconomic theory to be able to tell you exactly how to fix that. I mean, I'm not like one of these guys who says Obama was evil for spending, for increasing the deficit or the debt. It's always a problem. It's always a talking point that these guys go to because it's an easy thing to criticize, because pretty much every president has been problematic in that case. I mean, we are really afraid of austerity measures. Nobody wants to cut anything in the government. There are, I think, pretty reasonable solutions to some of this stuff, and I think left-wing people do have some good ideas about cutting. But in general, right-wing people do tend to be smaller government, which would actually reduce spending, reduce the debt, reduce the deficit. and left-wing people want to increase everything, which would be very stressful, I think. And I think that's the primary argument, right? Is that like the right wants to be better about it, even though they're not maybe as effective as they'd like to be.
Wait, wants to be better about what?
Reducing the deficit, reducing the debt.
Oh, but the right have never done that. I don't understand how they could possibly claim
I'm not going to disagree with you on this. I don't necessarily think that the politicians' intentions always match their effectiveness.
So who cares about the effectiveness of their intention? Do you really think that there's not like for instance, like the military-industrial complex isn't something that's massively supported by the Republican Party? Are we going to pretend that that's just like an accident, or?
That's a hard thing for me to defend, because I really don't believe that we need to be all over the world. I'm actually kind of in favor of reducing the military presence abroad.
Okay. Do you think we should still have it structured so that corporations and wealthy people pay less and less and less tax? That things like our capital gains tax brackets need to look so much different than our ordinary income tax brackets? Are these like good tax policies that basically just shovel more money?
Okay. You're getting kind of in the weeds there, but I would definitely say that being rich it should not be something that we are hypercritical of in America. And the reason is because you have to have a level of wealth that people want to attain in order to encourage them to do great things.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but again, I'm using your argument because you told me that a bunch of immigrants coming in here isn't necessarily good if all of the gains of those economic activities are going to the top whatever percentage of Americans. That was your statement.
I mean, and that's one argument. And look, that's not like the straw that breaks the camel's back. I mean, that's not the whole point. You do have a whole cultural argument to deal with, which is what Lauren Southern really wanted to talk to you about.
Well, yeah, because this is a lot more feels-based and a lot harder to make any coherent arguments on, but we can do that.
Okay, I'll make a couple of coherent arguments.
Sure.
What's your okay, so have you ever heard of Jordan Peterson's idea that like certain people are so low IQ that they really can't function in society well?
Yeah, I'm familiar with this idea that you need a baseline of like, it's like an 85 IQ or something in order to function in the way that society is constructed
and
today.
There's a pretty significant number of people that are below that.
Okay.
Now, I don't necessarily think that a lot of the people we're bringing in from other countries are below that, but I would say that a lot of them are impoverished, right? And a lot of hyper low IQ people are impoverished, right? So if you're bringing in a lot of people who are super low IQ, super low education, to fill jobs that are sort of like, berry picking or factory work, something that's repetitive, that doesn't take any kind of like, intellectual capacity. What then do you do when those jobs fill up? Because it's not a zero-sum game generally. Like all the economists say, well, the economy will just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, right? So, you'll just fill those jobs. You might displace some people temporarily, but because the GDP is growing, the pie is growing, those people will be able to find jobs again. But not in the case of automation, right? And I'm sure have you heard Andrew Yang's stuff about that?
I mean, I'm familiar with UBI and automation, but yeah.
Right. So his whole concept is that we're going to automate so many different areas of the economy that all these people are going to be out of work soon. And I'm not 100% convinced that that's true. I don't think that, once you automate something, usually other jobs sprout up around that automation in order to, satisfy, other aspects that are made available. Like for instance, at my grocery store, they now have automated, tellers, and they don't need as many automated tellers. What am I talking about? Cashiers or whatever. They don't need as many cashiers, and so you think, okay, well, there's, there are fewer people working at that grocery store. But now I actually just order my groceries in. I don't even go through there.
Okay. So let's back up, because I don't know what argument are we extracting from here about immigrants coming from Mexico or from South.
My point is saying we're not being careful about who we're bringing in. We're bringing in such what would I say, low skill labor types from around the world. It's not just Mexico. I mean, it's it's from various places around the world. Mexico, it's like easier, obviously, from people from South America and Mexico to come in. So it's like a huge majority of it, but or a huge percentage of it, I guess. But if you fill up your country with those people, and suddenly you find that there just are not enough jobs for them, they will either take the jobs and push out the people who already have them, or they won't be able to find jobs.
Okay,
And
do you think that it's weird that you're making this argument? Like earlier, I was looking through your channel and I literally saw in like the last video you did, you had a commercial where you're selling a silver dollar, and it's printed, embedded on that silver dollar is that our unemployment rate is lower than it has been in the past 50 years. How are you making an argument right now that unemployment is going to increase when the net flow of immigrants into this country has been decreasing anyway, and the educational attainment of these immigrants has been going up?
I am not arguing that we should not bring in any immigrants at all. My core argument is going to be that if you want me to get down to the basics of it, I just think we should be very careful about who we do bring in terms of who is. Okay, so the argument that I've read about the net gain in terms of the immigrant situation, like especially like the low skilled immigrants, is that they are actually a net drain on the economy temporarily, like when they first come, and then over the course of like another generation. So once their kids become adults and get into the economy and then die off.
No, that's impossible. When they come, so let me be very careful with how I say this. When an immigrant first gets here, it's possible that they are a net drain fiscally. So that means on the local budgets of whatever system they live into, so whatever city or state they move into, fiscally, they might be a slight drain. However, most economists agree that this disappears or reverses, depending on who you ask, after a single generation, and the economic benefits, meaning the amount of trade and services that go around revolving around these people, always increases. That's just a fundamental tenet of capitalism, that as you increase your supply of some resource, like labor, and increase the demand for products, you are necessarily going to increase your economy. This is like a fundamental tenet of capitalism in the way that we grow our economy.
Right. I 100% agree with that. But what happens when a lot of these jobs disappear and you just don't have enough jobs for people? Right now, you're right. Right now, we do have room to bring people in.
I mean, when that happens, then we,
like this, as you know,
I mean, then we invest in education. Is something that America does in a very, very
hate that invest in education, the nonsense. You're really just. That's
then what do we do?
Okay, well, this is my thinking. What will inevitably happen will be homelessness, right? You're going to increase homelessness like crazy, and homelessness is increasing right now, which is a huge problem. I honestly think that the homeless problem, which is so weird because we're in such a good economy, like there's no reason for there to be so many homeless people. We need to take care of that issue. But I wonder if you suspect that there's. I mean, presumably you don't think this, but don't you think that bringing in like the lowest skilled people that don't speak English, it's going to be harder for them to actually like incorporate into society easily?
Not generally. It doesn't seem to be. I mean, that's not where the data points. But I mean, like, I'm a hardcore capitalist when I look at these types of issues. So if you're coming at this from like a different like moral or cultural background,
it's not about moral.
Okay, well, from the economics point of view, like it's pretty clear that when this is why in the EU, this is why they import people to work. This is why when immigrants come into the United States, you see all of these different types of industries grow. Like, I just don't know. I can't posit like an argument against this economically. We could talk about culture or whatever if we want. That's where Lawrence Southern had to pivot to. But I mean, like economically, there's just like sister industries and other types of employment opportunities open over and over and over again. We've been saying for the past 100 years, since before we started, back in Europe when textile mills opened up, people were saying like, oh no, like now that one person sewing at a machine can work, 50 times faster than a person with needle and thread, no one is going to have any jobs. Yep. Or oh no, now that we have computers and Microsoft Excel, no secretary is going to have a job. Or oh no, now that we're automating, manufacturing, but it hasn't happened, because of the way our economy works. We always open new jobs. We always, there are more services that we provide today that we didn't used to. Like it hasn't seemed to happen yet. Now it's not to say maybe it'll happen in the future. I
agree with you to some extent that society will shift to accommodate to some extent, right? I'm not sure that that's going to be sustainable forever.
Maybe I agree. But now this is a fundamental critique of capitalism. Man, I wish I could woke you up to some Marxist shit because you would love it, dude. This is a fundamental critique of capitalism.
We should have a socialist debate next.
This is a fundamental critique of capitalism. It's the idea that capitalism and the way we have interest rates and everything set up relies on a constantly growing economy. That if your economy stops growing, you're dying. And this is something that people are very critical of.
I'm not saying our economy is going to stop growing. I'm saying that it won't always grow in every sector.
Well, but that's how capitalism already works. When a sector lives or dies, if a sector dies, then other industries open up to absorb, whether it's
right, and that's what I mean by shifting to accommodate the population.
Oh yeah, well, I mean that's already been happening, and we would expect it to continue happening. Right?
The problem lies in a growing, shifting economy that starts to abandon the sort of like, this is such a vulgar thing to say, but the low IQ, low skilled labor.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. That's a problem we have to address.
So my what I'm trying to say is, it's not that we don't bring people in, it's that we just be more specific about who we allow to come in. Right?
I mean, like, firstly, I don't understand. I don't know if I agree with this idea that all of the people coming into this country are like low IQ and that their children and them will be stuck
they're not all.
forever.
They're not all. There's just a lot.
I'm totally letting that slide because it's a whole other can of worms to open. But secondly, like, when this starts to become a problem, then yeah, we address it. And I don't see why you don't think like things like investment into education, things that other countries do, would be like a good way to like deal with problems like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, the investment in education thing is a difficult thing to talk about, because then we have to get into privatization, because that's my solution, and I assume that it's not your solution.
Well, I mean, my solution would be I would look at empirically what works around the world, and I've never seen privatization of education ever be a successful way to address educational problems. I'm curious why you think that would work.
Well, do you want to pivot into that?
Sure. Why would you think privatization of education is the way to fix it?
Okay, well, right now you have, I think, two humongous problems. I mean, you've seen Waiting for Superman?
No.
Okay, you got to see that movie. Okay, so there's two basic problems. You have the teachers' unions, which don't allow schools to fire bad teachers. And you've got districting, which essentially means that you have to go to the school in your district. It doesn't matter if it's a total crap hole or if it's the best school in the world. You have to go there. You know, there's no choice. You have you have to go to that school. It doesn't matter what the teachers are like. It doesn't matter what the parents say. It doesn't matter what the kids say. If the teacher's got tenure, they're stuck in that school. What happens when you have the privatization is you say, okay, the money goes with the kid. Whatever school you want to go to, that's where we send you. Okay, and so then the good schools grow and the crappy schools shrink, and then the schools have the power to fire the teachers that are bad, because they need to have that power, and they have the power to pay teachers who are awesome. They have the power to pay them well.
Okay, so we have
that kind of, you know, and you're saying you're a pure capitalist.
Yeah.
You got to understand that that's going to work. That's
well,
going
so
to be
when I
better.
say I'm a pure capitalist, you have to understand that sometimes the market does things well, sometimes the market does things not well. Education is one of those things that probably shouldn't be tied into your economic attainment, because we would hope in our society that education is the great equalizer, that anybody should be able to go to a school and do something, right? We like to believe that meritocracies exist in the real world.
But school isn't magic.
Well, of course not.
I mean,
So let's talk about like these two things that you brought up. Okay, one of these is like kind of bad, and another is horrendously bad. Okay. So the first thing you mentioned was that if you privatize it, we don't have to deal with teachers' unions. What do teacher unions have to do with privatize? Do you mean you're going to make unions illegal?
I don't think I would make unions illegal, but it would reduce the power significantly.
Wait, how would it reduce the power if there'd still be a teachers' union?
Because there is a difference between unions that function in private industry and unions that function within the government.
What is like the meaningful difference here?
Profit.
Profit where? Of who?
Well, the government makes no profit. They have no incentive to fight the teachers' unions. They just give in to the teachers' unions.
Then why don't teachers all make $150,000 a year?
Well, depending on where you go, different teachers' unions are stronger or weaker. In California, it's mental. Okay, what they did with the teachers' unions in California.
Just to be clear, this is California. This is where you were talking where teachers went on strike because class sizes were getting to 40 students per class. This is where the unions have too much power, you're saying. So just to preface that, go for it.
Are you in California?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know about this a little bit. Okay, so then you know that what they're doing is, instead of giving teachers like huge salaries, they're giving them huge retirement, like whatever you call it. I forget what they call it. But
pensions.
Thank you, pensions. So you know about the pension problem. I mean, it's bankrupting the frickin' state.
Okay, so how do we deal with? Okay, so it sounds like then you do have to deal with an issue of budgets. Maybe we don't call it profit, but do you know where teachers usually get paid out of?
Well, I don't know where you're going.
They get paid with tax money that comes from raising property taxes. In California, I'm pretty sure Prop 13 puts a whole fuck up in that, in terms of how those schools are even funded.
Okay.
So teachers unions in capitalist industries or you know, in things that are for profit might have to fight against like capital owners that don't want to pay them more, but that same fight exists publicly as well. In fact, it might even be It might even be harder in some cases because publicly you have to fight against like city budgets and whatnot.
Right.
Like,
You're tying the pay to the teachers to very specific taxation, which only pertains to a small subset of the population. So if you go and you say we're going to have a vote on this, and there's like 6% of the population that's going to be affected, the 94% of the population that is voting that isn't affected is going to vote to increase taxes on this 6% of the people, right? The majority is going to destroy that minority. Because
wait, but that's not. Firstly, that's not how it works, at least in California. But secondly, like this
thing is just business owners, or not business owners, property owners.
Yeah, but this is how schools are funded. So like this gets into your second point, which was really bad. You were saying that like the money goes where the kids go or whatever in private schools.
Yes.
That's a huge problem because that's how schools work now. That's why so many schools are so fucked. Rich kids go to rich schools and poor kids go to poor schools. It's one of the huge divides that we have in education. You're talking about
when you break down the system of districting, that completely alleviates that problem.
How? Rich people still live in rich areas, poor people still live in poor areas. It would exacerbate the problem.
I'm so confused by why you think this. Okay, so let's
right now, let's look at it. So right now, here's a big problem that we have in the United States, okay? I know because my home city of Omaha fought over this issue a fuck ton. We have really rich people. I know this because I moved my kids to the richest district because I wanted to go to the best public school, okay? The best public school in Omaha gets funded by property taxes. Property taxes, and this is pretty common in the United States, property taxes fund your schools. The more a house costs on a piece of land, the higher the property tax is. So what does that mean? People that are in richer parts of the city with bigger houses pay more property taxes, which fund bigger schools, right? If I go to North Omaha, if anybody here is from my city, if you go to North Omaha, you go to Omaha North, these schools are fucking shit. These are garbage. Half the time the fucking gym is fucking flooded in some of these horrible fucking schools. Where my kid goes to school, I got a picture every fucking day from whatever he was working on his iPad in kindergarten. They get iPads in kindergarten because that school district is so wealthy, right? So this is a big problem. Because poor people are getting their life fucked before they even get out the door, right? Just because of
I don't understand how you don't understand that the privatization fixes all of these problems.
Because if you privatize it, it's just going to cause these same problems to grow even more. Because now the only funding for the school is going to come from the people that can afford to go there. It's not like somebody that lives like 45 minutes away is going to have the opportunity to drive their child on over to a wealthy school. That's not how it's going to work. Plus,
you're right. That's not how it's going to work. This is how it's going to work.
Yeah, how is it going to work?
This is how it's going to work. You'll have kids who live close to good schools who can't go to those schools currently because they're in the wrong district. And they're just going to say, okay, screw that school. That school was crap. I'm going to go to this one.
Wait, but that's not how it works. If you live in the district,
hold on. You got to understand. You can live close to a school and still not be in that district.
This sounds like a really rare, like,
no, extremely common. Okay, hold on. There's two things I need to say here. The first thing is that this is a very common phenomenon in cities. Okay, in rural areas, it's not quite as common, obviously, but in cities, you can live next to 2 or 3 schools, and you can just happen to be in the district of the crappier one, right? This happens all the time. Second thing is that there's something called entrepreneurship in America. I can build a school in a crappy neighborhood that's way better than the school that they already have, and I can steal all those students, and I can get all that government money because the money goes with the kid. That will. But
the government money is based on the property taxes, so there's not going to be that much money to earn. Firstly, secondly, this districting problem is not real. I don't believe it. I would have to see something. I can't let that slide. Like the way that's like the idea that you live next to.
No, I'm good with you countering that because that is insane. For you to think that the districting problem is not real, I'm perfectly happy to win that argument.
Like there might be look
anywhere.
Well, I mean, I know my city. I can acknowledge that there might be like weird cases where like, oh, like I'm kind of weirdly fucked by my district here, but this is going to be far from the norm. These are going to be like rare exceptions where like people get fucked.
Districting is pretty much the entire problem. Districting and the power of the teachers unions are the basic problems of why schools suck in America.
Well, but the districting problem is not bad because kids are next to all these great schools, but they have to go to the shitty one. The districting problem is bad because poor kids go to poor schools.
No, look at somewhere like Chicago. Chicago's a perfect example. You've got tons of crappy neighborhoods next to tons of awesome neighborhoods, right? You've essentially got segregation, right?
Yes, the districting like plays into because of how the funding works.
Yeah. I mean,
So if you make it so that
you know what's
rich,
actually really funny about that? That the school districting sometimes, I think, now that you mention it, sometimes ends up pushing people into certain neighborhoods, and that like reinforces the problem,
yeah, but like, how did
right?
this not do the same? Let's say you've got a bunch of rich people in a school district, or I'm sorry, in a city, and then a bunch of poor people. Aren't the poor
Yeah.
people only going to be able to afford the shitty school, and the rich people are going to be able to afford the wealthy
Okay.
school?
Okay. Hold on. Let's just say, in your scenario, what you're saying is that we retain this system in which we tax people on their properties, and then that is the money that goes to the school that is in their district or something like that,
Well,
right?
no, you would make it a
Why don't we
single.
just have the money come from somewhere else?
Well, I mean, if you want to like make a new form of tax revenue off of something else, that's fine. Historically,
No.
Republicans
You
don't
just
like
have
to
the-
raise
you just
taxes,
have-
but
you can just shift the stuff around so that it's not tied to the property
well,
tax.
where are you cutting funding from?
You're not cutting funding from anywhere. You're just saying, okay, instead of the property tax going to the schools, property tax goes somewhere else, and you bring in something else from some other tax that goes into the schools. I mean, if you think it's that
Oh, wait,
big of a
wait. So
problem,
do you think maybe like we make like a single school district instead of sending all the money to the individual school districts? Because people
No,
try
you-
that, but
it's-
wealthy people fight against it because they don't want their expensive property tax money going to the shitty kids' schools. They want it to stay in their schools.
exactly right. I'm sitting here trying to create equality amongst everybody, and you're fighting like hell to maintain the status quo.
No,
I mean,
I don't want to
know why
maintain the
Democrats
status
don't love this idea.
Wait, because privatizing it just means that wealthy people will get more access to education, which we would hopefully use for people to like equalize themselves. Like if you're really smart, you're really talented, you should be able to go to any school and come out like on top. You should have like the same opportunities available to you. Hopefully.
Do you think that is realistic in a system in which teachers can't get hired, can't get fired or paid better for their merit?
I mean, I think that that's something that you have to address, but I don't think that's the main problem with our system is the teachers unions, which by the way would still exist in a private system unless you banned them, unless you banned unions. But
Well,
yeah, I would
okay,
absolutely say that like mixing up school districts and not having all the rich money go to the rich schools and all the poor money go to the poor schools would probably be a really big step in the right direction.
Oh, it would fix everything because schools would not discriminate so much. They really couldn't discriminate based on region.
Well, they would
You
discriminate
could-
based on price, which would end up discriminating based on status, which would end up discriminating based on probably where you live on the city. We'd be in the same spot we are now.
All right. Let me give you a great example. This is a very personal example for me. I might shed a tear. No, I'm not
Okay.
going to shed. I'll be right. Okay, so my brother was dyslexic growing up, right? Like hardcore dyslexic. Like he couldn't read. And nobody at the schools, at the public schools, could teach him how to read because they really weren't prepared to deal with dyslexic students, even though there were tons of them. And my mom was constantly going to like the school board and to the teachers and saying, like, you got to teach my son to read. Like, they're like, we don't know how to teach a dyslexic kid. So my mom quit her job, right? And she drove my brother up to Portland every single day for like several years, which is an hour drive away. And then she had to hang out there until he was done with school and then drive him back. Every day, she just sacrificed years of her life to take my brother to this special school so he could learn to read because the public schools couldn't do it. That is ridiculous. And we had to pay a ton of money, right? Now, how many parents have the money, have the time, have the will to do that for their kid? And I can tell you, my brother was not the only dyslexic kid in the Salem Kaiser school district, okay? If you had a system where everything was privatized and entrepreneurs were incentivized to build new schools, you could build specific schools for specific people all over the country, and you would have, all the dyslexic kids could go to the dyslexic school in Salem, Oregon, learn to flip and read, right? And you could benefit everybody with like a learning disability or a particular, they're particularly athletic or artistic.
What would you
could
do if
find-
the market conditions made it such that providing special education services didn't yield a good economic benefit?
Why would it not?
Because you have to spend a lot of extra money to help with special needs kids. You need teachers that have special certifications and qualifications for it. You need to design a special curriculum for it. Oftentimes you need to bring in external types of equipment to deal with these kids. Oftentimes you need to bring, and I know this because my child is in special needs in school because he has extreme ADHD. So I'm very aware of all of the extra, and he goes to a public school, by the way, and they accommodate him just fine, perfectly fine. But there is a ton of extra outside, well, hold on. I'm saying, wait. I'm just saying there's a ton, I'm saying there's a ton of outside stuff that you have to bring in order to make this work. So what would you do if in your capitalist school system you had a school set up and they were like, hey, fuck, we're not going to take special needs kids. It doesn't economically make sense, which is what I'm guessing it would be.
Right. Okay, so you're saying that if you were to treat a bunch of kids for a specific disability at scale, it's actually going to be more expensive than doing it specially for a limited number of kids in a public school.
No, I'm saying it might not economically work out at all. It's just a net loss to deal with special needs kids.
Okay, sure. If you're saying that, okay, it will inevitably be cheaper and better to pool those kids together and help them in an entire group than to treat these special needs kids at this school, these special needs kids at this school, these special needs at this school.
Wait, but we can't pool them together in a special group. That's not realistic. Geographically, they're not all going to live in the same neighborhood in a city. That's not how special needs kids are distributed.
That's the beauty about the capitalist to market system, right? It kind of solves these problems on its own. So if there are situations...
How?
Well, because if there are situations in which it's not profitable, like you said, right, that, for a specific school to prop up like that, it may just end up happening that schools accommodate students that way, independently as they are doing now. But I don't think that it would be not profitable. I think that it would be profitable. But you would have to see.
If you had to choose between running a school where you accepted 1,000 kids and you could accommodate 50 special needs kids or just take 50 more normal kids, I would almost stake my life on the line right now that you would always be better off just accommodating 50 non-special needs children.
You know what's actually great about a system like, privatized system is that you can actually modify the system in certain ways. So you can actually say...
Well, you can do this with a public system too, but go ahead.
Yeah, if you could say it's a special needs kid and, those kids get like a more money that goes with them, right? So if you say like, every kid gets, whatever it is. 10,
so they would
20,
have to pay more to send their special needs kid to school?
Well, the government would allot more money for them for wherever they're going to school. You could potentially make a modification that way.
Okay, so it would be privately funded by people choosing which school they go to. But if you have a special needs kid, they would get like a school voucher or something, like handouts from the government.
No. Everybody gets a voucher. That's the beauty of the privatized system, right? Is that the government does give you money to go to school.
Okay, would these vouchers be worth the same amount between all children, or would some people get more like wealthier vouchers than the others?
No, everybody gets the same. And
wait, if everybody has the same...
If special needs student, like you said, I hadn't really thought about that before, but a special needs student who does need, more accommodation, maybe they do get more. Maybe you would, make some kind of accommodation.
Every single person is getting a voucher that's the exact same. Then what's the difference between doing that and just equalizing the money that we spend on schools right now via property taxes? If everybody gets vouchers and everybody's getting the same allotment, we might as well just...
Because it has been shown in study after study that just throwing money at education in America does not improve test scores, does not improve the quality of education.
Sure, because some people would argue that the amount of money being thrown around is inconsequential. Other people argue that other issues stem deeper from like just throwing a little bit of money at the school. But like,
I 100% agree with that. I mean,
sure,
they are deeper
but
problems.
But also, more importantly, voucher systems have been tried in other parts of the world. For instance, Sweden had a big experiment with voucher systems, and they failed miserably. I don't think voucher systems have ever been shown to like increase educational attainment or educational outcomes in any part where they've been experimented with.
Oh, they absolutely have. And here, I got a question for you. If you can send your kid to whatever school you want, where you can fire the bad teachers, you can incentivize the good teachers by paying, or incentivize all the teachers by paying the best teachers more money, right?
Even what you just...
Why would that not be beneficial?
What?
Why would that not be beneficial? How could that possibly not
Firstly, like, because I don't even know if the incentives work that way. What you just said, incentivize teachers to make more money. Like, that might not even necessarily be the way that teachers make the decisions on where they want to teach. Like a teacher might want to teach at a different school, even though they make less money doing it. For instance, there are teachers that work at private schools. The teachers that work at private schools tend to make less money than the teachers that work at public schools, but they choose to work at private schools for a number of reasons too, because they like that environment, et cetera, et cetera. So like, I don't know this idea that like making making teaching like some hyper competitive platform would even be like an effective way to increase like the educational outcomes in the US. I don't remember these offhand. We could go digging through them, I guess we won't, but like, I'm pretty sure I've read like a lot of conflicting studies on whether or not giving teachers more money like makes them better teachers. I don't necessarily know if that's how that system works.
Yeah, I don't know how I would, I haven't looked into that either, but I imagine that giving a bad teacher more money would not make them better. And what giving a good teacher more money would do at this point would just retain them. right?
Sure, I don't
Because
necessarily disagree with that. Although again, we would have to talk about increasing property taxes or fund.
that just seems like a rational consequence of paying teachers more under the current system, right? But the thing is, like, if you have a system in which teachers know they're going to get paid more, if the parents think that they're good and their kids are getting better test scores and they're getting good reviews every year, why would they not go on YouTube and look at new teaching methods, right? I mean, you can learn everything on YouTube right now, right?
Well,
or whatever.
Hopefully your teacher is not learning how to teach on YouTube, right? Like usually I think.
don't mind that.
I mean, I would rather have stuff that's been like tested and like vetted and like conforms to some like.
Silly, right?
Okay, well, I mean,
they could go take a class. They could, there's a variety of different things that they could do. You could investigate different ways to improve your service, right? To improve yourself so that you're going to be better with the students. You're going to put more effort into making the students like you, making the students learn. You're going to develop new teaching techniques as you go. It's not like you graduate from school, you get the job, you get the tenure, and then you're like, screw the students, I'm good. And I mean, I know that doesn't always happen, but it happens often enough where I think it's tragic.
Yeah, I don't even know if we necessarily disagree with anything here. Like revamping the education system in the United States is probably very important. It seems like other countries are experimenting with this, and the United States has been reluctant to for a variety of reasons. But like circling back, what?
Somebody wrote brainstorming, not debating, which is actually what I prefer. I prefer, like, to be open-minded and to talk to an open-minded person and to be brainstorming. And
well, yeah,
debating.
I understand. It's frustrating, I guess. Like when you look at if we go to like countries around the world and see how they do education or how they do healthcare, for instance, and then like we stubbornly refuse to take notes from any other country that's been more successful than us doing it, and we're like, well, no, let's just make it private or whatever, even though we have
I do think that we take notes from these other countries, but the problem is with other countries, they have homogenous cultures, right? They have homogenous cultures. They have small populations. So what works for a lot of these countries that are highly successful with education, it will not work with us.
What is that? Wait. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you have certain homogenous cultures, it's much easier to teach all the students within the group, because they're all relatively at the same level. They're all we have such a diverse range of people in America. What works for one school may not work particularly well for another school in a completely
like there are groups of people in the US that can't learn like math or chemistry or how to type on a keyboard or learn how to read, or what do you mean?
It's more difficult for some people in some places. And like, okay, let's say because you got a lot of people, this is perfect segue back into immigration, right? You have people that just don't speak English particularly well. If you have a school that's particularly good at teaching some students English, it's going to be better for those students.
Sure. So like English classes are probably pretty important in American schools. I don't necessarily disagree with that. ESL is a very real thing in the United States. Plenty of people learn
in a
English
market
in schools.
economy, in a market system, any market system is going to be able to better shift to service the people that they need to serve than like a dictatorial system.
That's not true, though. That's fundamentally not true. There are market failures all the time that make it impossible for certain markets to respond to different needs. Like we know this is not true. We can look at ISPs in the United States, healthcare in the United States, pollution in the United States. I mean, these are all systems where market failures are abundantly evident and easy to look, even at a 101 level, that needs to be addressed with some sort of government regulation, whether it's because there's an externality that's not felt by the market. So, for instance, pollution isn't felt, whether or not there are middlemen that are scraping too much money off of.
So you don't think that parents and the students that a better education or a worse education is going to be felt or observed?
Wait, of course I do. Yeah. What do you mean?
Okay, so it's not really. The examples you're giving aren't relevant. If you can't see...
Well, no, I was just responding to your general claim that markets are always better at determining how resources are allocated rather than dictating.
Okay, I'll give you that. That
sure.
Occasionally you'll find situations that,
sure.
that doesn't
and
apply
also,
here.
I don't know if I agree with this idea. Like, these European countries have lots of people, right? Germany has over 80 million people. France has almost 70 million. The UK has almost 70 million people. The idea that, like, we're, like, so much larger than these countries isn't really true, but all of these countries seem to have a much better time, funding their education than we do. Why? Why do we try to make it private? Why not take notes from these countries that are doing it better than us and just copy them?
Yeah, I do think that we do that. I think I've seen...
But we don't. You're talking about privatizing it right now.
Right. No, I think that is the best solution for the United States. I don't think that there is a logical argument against it.
What makes us so fundamentally different from all these other countries? Like...
Because we have a hugely diverse population.
What do you mean by diverse population? That makes it impossible for us to make schools work. Like, we have a diverse population now in the country.
It's not that it makes it impossible for schools to work. It just makes it that a uniform implementation of a particular type of school may not work everywhere all the time.
Do you think that like every single school in Germany is the same? Like the people from like little bumfuck towns like Krefeld are going to be the same as people from like Berlin? Oh. Like, I don't understand what, like, all of these places are like.
They all probably grew up speaking German.
First of all, I don't even necessarily know if that's true.
Well, no, not anymore.
Secondly, I'm pretty sure most people in the United States can speak English. Is that your big problem, that you don't think we could? You don't think that we could have a better education system in the United States because none of people speak English?
Listen. I'm not convinced that just because Switzerland or somewhere has a great education system, that their education system would not be improved by privatizing the system. You seem to think that their education system is better than ours, and therefore we should adopt their system, and that means that the privatization idea wouldn't be better. But you don't actually.
Do you ever work out?
Yeah.
It sounds like a guy who's like sitting at home who goes to the gym like once a month, like trying to theory craft like the perfect workout, but he never even goes to the gym. And then you've got other people that go 3 times a week and they do whatever.
Go to school.
Sure, but then you've got other people that are doing things that are much more successful than that other guy, but maybe it's not like optimal. Maybe, I don't even know if we could begin to guess. But the guy that like never. Well, hold on, let me finish, please. Let me finish.
Okay,
God, you're monologuing so much,
like
okay? You're monologuing so much, okay? Like you have somebody that's like you're pretending to theory craft like the perfect education system, while our current education system is already fucking leagues behind what exists in other countries in Europe. We're like 26th in the world or something, maybe even less in terms of educational attainment. And we're pretending like, okay, well, maybe their system is good, but I bet it could be even better than that. Well, dude, ours is so much worse than that. Why are we thinking about like the next step when we're not even caught up to them? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, so I like your workout analogy. I think it's beautiful. And I think that you would agree that not every diet regimen and workout regimen works for every body type, right? That's pretty well understood by most people.
Not necessarily. I would disagree. Pretty much most diet and workout stuff is pretty general from person to person, like 95% of the time, save for like special like medical diseases or something, like medical conditions or something.
I like medical diseases. I think we should coin that. No, look, some people have need to focus more on cardio. Some people need to focus more on weightlifting. Some people need to, some people for whatever reason, like, low sugar diet works for them. Other people like low calorie diet. Other people cut the fats and somehow they lose more weight, right? There's different theories. I've seen them all work, right? For different kinds of people, different kinds of body types.
Do you see the problem with the one guy that doesn't go to the gym at all, save one time a month, sitting there critiquing like everybody else's plan, saying he's going to find the perfect way to do it when he's behind every other person that goes to the gym and does anything at all?
Yeah, but I think that you're conflating.
But that's what America is right now. Our education sucks in the U.S.
You're saying that because America is a poor system, that my theorizing about privatization or anybody else who likes this idea is the couch potato, right? Well, you don't actually know that. I mean,
No, but what I do know is every other country seems to have similar ideas about education. Most of them outperform the United States. Right. And in some places where voucher systems have been tried, like in Sweden, they failed miserably. So why would I try to jump to that system when we could just copy what the other countries do? And
I haven't looked at this particular situation you're talking about in Sweden.
If you ever get bored, like after this, you can look up like Sweden voucher system or whatever. There's tons of discussions on it. Yeah.
Well, maybe there was a fatal flaw with the way they implemented it. I don't know, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense that if you put a bunch of teachers, you say, okay, you get paid by merit, right? And any student can come to your school or they can go to a different school. That kind of competition would actually stagnate the growth of.
I mean, we could sit here and we could hypothesize a million ways that could stagnate growth.
It's not about okay. Give me one.
Sure. Let's say that we have a distribution of good teachers all over the city. Okay, and it's all publicly funded. And they're all doing their thing, and educational attainment around the entire city is pretty good. You understand that there's like a marginal gain for like moving to the next level, right? Like if I give you $1 million, that's gonna feel way better than if I give you like $1 million more dollars or $1 million more dollars or $1 million more dollars, right? That going from 0 to 1 million is way better than going from 99 million to 100 million. Do you agree with that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Okay. So let's say I've got my teachers spread out all over the city. Let's say that I move to some voucher system, some hyper privatized system. And as a result of that, and everybody can freely move wherever they want, all the teachers that are really good all move to the single best school. And you see that school do a little bit better, but it was already doing well because the kids there were wealthy and it had good teachers. But now all the other schools lost all of their good teachers because they all fled and they all went to the best one. Now you've effectively lowered the entire educational attainment of your city at the benefit of one very small select group of hyper elite people that can afford the best of the best of the best teachers. Like, and that's like just one. We could do 50 million more if you want. There are tons of ways that this incentive structure could poison your overall educational attainments in the country.
Well, that doesn't seem to be how really anything works, right? I mean, anything in the market system. It's not like there's one business that all the best people work at and every other business is crap in America.
Wait, what are you talking about? That happens all the time. I pay $3,000 a month for my shitty one thing fucking room in LA because that's where everybody wants to move to be. If you want to work in software engineering, everybody's going to San Francisco. There are cities that will literally fuck themselves in the ass with their taxes. I'm sorry, you don't swear for yourself. I'm sorry. But there are cities that will literally like destroy their own budgets in an attempt to beg and plead Amazon to come and work at their company. This absolutely happens where certain pools or certain things will draw in pools of talent away from every other person. Like, yeah, of course.
Okay, well,
look at colleges right now. Sorry, go ahead.
You're right that people pool, right? But they don't tend to pool in one place exclusively, right? It may be like, several really, really good places
that most people can't afford. Look at the elite colleges right now in the United States where this happens. If you want to get like the best law degree, you want to go to the best law school, it's going to cost you a lot of money to do it.
Right. No, you're 100% right. But there is a distribution, right? So you have like the top pools, and then you have the secondary pools, and then you have tertiary pools, right? And and so the people at the bottom or near the bottom, they either need to up their game or they die. Right?
Don't you think that's kind of a bad way to structure society?
No, because in a centralized government type scenario like we have with the school system now, there is no incentive to improve.
Well, I mean, we don't have it centralized right now. We have elite colleges in the United States right now that only like the most wealthy are able to afford to go to, or the most highest achieving people are able to afford to go to.
Yeah, but we also have a system now where like just about anybody can go to college.
Yeah, at great personal cost to themselves, assuming they can make it through like
not if it's like a community college or a trade school.
Okay, yeah, but nobody wants to get a law degree from Smith Johnson College down the street.
They don't have to get a law degree. They can get another kind of degree.
Well, but what if you? But this is the problem, right? Okay, maybe we're coming from totally different places. So I'm hyper capitalist. I very much believe in free markets. I very much believe in competition, and I very much believe in liberalism. A very big liberal. I think that people should be empowered to make the best choices possible in society because I think those lead to the best economic outcomes in society. If
like, say, choosing the school they go to?
What?
Is it like choosing the school they go to?
No, like it doesn't matter if you choose a school to go to. What matters is having the opportunities available to you at the school that you're at. If I've got some kid that's amazingly fucking intelligent, super sharp, super bright, but for all of these problems in his life, he's fucked and he's not able to pay, the $100,000 a year to go to the best law school, and he's got to go to a shitty law school as a result of that. Well, now I'm losing out on that lawyer because he doesn't have the money to go to the most elite institution. We don't want a system like that. It doesn't serve our interests. It doesn't benefit us.
Right, but okay. It really, okay, so if you have a lot of people and some people have access to some stuff and other people have access to other stuff, it's not like perfectly equal. We would prefer to make it more equal, right?
For certain things, not necessarily for everything. Like, I don't know if like every single person, for instance, should be able to have like the latest iPhone. But when it comes to things like education, these are huge things that should be.
No. I listen to me. I'm trying to agree with you. I do think that for the most part, we should make opportunities more equal for as many people as possible.
Sure.
Once you get to like the college level or going to, getting a job at a great industry or something like that. Look, listen, if you have rich parents, your life is going to be better, period. Right. I don't really care about that. I'm fine with that system. It's not ideal, but it's way better than having a system in which it doesn't matter if your parents are rich. Only these certain people can have, because the government says so. And so if you grow up in a crappy neighborhood and you have to go to a crappy school because that's the district you're in, and your parents can't afford to move you out of that district to another district, what opportunity do you have? You are stuck because the law is you're just done. You're stuck.
Well, but you just said it right there. Why can't the parents just move? Because they can't afford it. It is about rich people or poor people in this example when it comes to education in the United States.
But what if there was no districting? What if anybody could just build a school and they get the government money because they attract the students, and then the students could actually just like not go to the school in their district and go to another school, and it's paid for by the government, even though it's a private school, or even though it's the school in the next district over? It's
I mean, I guess you could do that, but at that point, I don't see what the difference is between that and like publicly funding education. You're talking about everybody getting a voucher; they're not allowed to spend any more money, and then everybody takes that voucher and goes to a school. Then it's just the same thing you had before. It's just you're distributing all of your taxes more evenly, which I'm in favor of. I would call it like one school district instead of having multiple districts. But instead of vouchers, you would just evenly distribute the property taxes.
It's just a removal of districts.
Sure, I'm all in favor of removing districts. Although right now, wealthy people fight against that because they don't want their tax money going to poor schools. That's generally why people fight against it right now. But yeah, getting rid of districting is a great idea, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's a very conservative Republican idea. And if you look, it's getting rid of districting and giving schools the money of, whatever, because you can't get rid of districting and have schools funded in the way that they're funded currently. Now, you have to have the money go with the student. Because right now it's population based, right? So the school gets a certain amount of money based on the population, and I suppose based on the amount of money that they raise within the district.
Well, they get money based on the money does go with the student right now.
No, it goes with the district. Like what? Because it's like what
the
you were
district that you live in, you pay property taxes in, and then that student goes to the school in that district that you're paying property taxes to.
Yeah. And so, okay, so what incentive does any teacher have to improve themselves under a system in which the teacher can't be fired once they get tenure? Let's just move on to that.
Okay, I could be totally wrong, but I don't think you get tenure teaching like grade school. Do you? Am I just wrong on that?
I don't know about grade school, but I think high school, yeah.
Do you get tenure? Do you get tenured as a high? I was under the impression that tenure is something given to professors so that they can continue research without threat of being fired by their university.
That's why it's so outrageous and horrible.
Okay.
They have these things in New York. I forget what they call them. But because they can't fire teachers, or this was true a while back. I don't know if this is true now. But they would actually, if a teacher was caught doing something absolutely terrible, like abusing a student, like sexually abusing a student or something like that, but they couldn't fire them, they would just put them in they would just keep them working, but they would just have to go to this empty room and sit all day.
Sure. If anyone in my chat, real quick, I'm just curious. I'm really curious what the percentages of tenured high school teachers are. If anybody has that, I'm super curious on that. But so the question before is like, what can you do? Well, I mean, you hold them accountable publicly, right? You've got a school board that you vote on. You've got like curriculums that you can pass. You've got federal guidelines that you can follow, like things like Common Core. I mean, there are other ways that we would hope to hold these people accountable based on whether or not they can meet like our federal guidelines for educating students.
Right. That all I suppose could work, theoretically, but it doesn't seem to. We still have a crappy system
because of districting, right? Like,
I do think districting is a huge problem, but I don't just think it's districting, because let's say we got rid of the districting and the students could go wherever they want, and you did have the money go with the student. They would have an incentive to, try to make the school as good as it can be, and it would improve the school to some degree. But if you can't get rid of these ridiculous restrictions on hiring and firing teachers and paying based on merit, you do not end up getting, you really restrict the school's ability to improve itself. Because really schools and your ability to teach students is all about how effective the teachers are.
Kind of, but I mean, like, even if I were to grant this, which I don't think I'm willing to, but even if I were to grant this, the idea that you could just go to another school, that isn't always true either, right? A lot of people don't have the ability to just drive their kid 45 minutes or 30 minutes across town to go to a different school. A lot of them are still going to be locked in.
Okay, so do you not agree that it's possible that, well, not possible, but probable that a lot of entrepreneurs, given this system, would actually build new schools throughout the country, small schools?
I don't know if it could be profitable at that scale. I mean, if they wanted to, they could do this now, right? They could already build these schools.
They do these like Montessori schools. There's all these kind of like strip mall schools, which, they do this homeschool program stuff that is relatively profitable, but the government isn't supplementing it at this point, right? So if the government supplemented it, every parent in the country could send their kid to a private school or to whatever school they wanted, right? And then that would actually really, incentivize business, entrepreneurs to build new schools. Because right now you are really only catering to a very small market. Well, it's not that small, but a smallish market, because it's just the people that can afford to send their kids to private school despite the fact they're already paying taxes for the public school, right? If you give every parent money, essentially, I mean, you're not actually giving them money, a voucher, then they really are just freed up to send their kids wherever they want.
I mean, like, I guess we're agreeing. The difference is disagreeing here on like orders of magnitude. Like, I can understand that tenure might be like a problem with teachers. I've never before heard this cited as the reason why our education system sucks. Like, I could be wrong. Well, not from anybody that seriously discusses education. Like, are you telling me that tenure doesn't exist like in European universities? Like, they don't have tenure anywhere there?
For high schools, I actually don't know.
Like in Europe, I'm pretty sure that there probably tenure exists over there.
I feel a little bit bad about this particular topic because I just feel like you don't know the situation.
Well, you're just bringing up points that I've never heard before.
Right. Which is, I mean, it's tough to have an intelligent conversation about something that somebody hasn't like read up on or looked into these issues. And maybe it's good that we're talking about it because now you can look into it and then you'll be better prepared next time. But yeah, teachers definitely get tenure. Teachers are definitely like overpaid that are crappy teachers. Teachers can't get fired. They can't give merit pay to the best teachers. I mean, the whole thing's just a effed situation. I mean, do you really think that the best teachers shouldn't get paid more and that the worst teachers shouldn't get fired?
I already hypothesized an earlier scenario where that could lead to an overall destruction of the quality of education in a state, right? If all the good teachers go to one school, but I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. Like I haven't
hypothetical situation, but it's like a.
I understand the hypotheticals because I've heard a lot of bizarre arguments before, but I have never heard this one. So like here is the average number of public school teachers. The average number of public school teachers who were dismissed in the previous year or did not have contracts renewed based on poor performance by tenure status of teachers and selected public school district characteristics. These are numbers from 2007 to 2008. In every single column here, it seems like teachers with tenure were more likely to get fired than teachers without tenure. So, I mean, like, just looking at this, and I mean, I could probably dig through this more.
How do you fire a teacher with tenure? Isn't the whole point of tenure that they can't be fired?
No, I think the point is that you usually have to go through a more official process. Wait a second. Wait, do you think that getting tenure means you can't be fired?
Well, it means you're right. It's much more difficult to be fired. You can't just fire them. You have to actually go through this process, right? Like they have to. I mean, it's insane the difficulty of firing a tenured teacher or professor.
Okay, okay, hold on. Holy shit, I didn't even consider this. Okay. So do you think that it is significantly difficult to fire like if a teacher, for instance, like rapes a kid or something, like if they're tenured, do you think that they just like get away with it or?
Well, no, obviously, I think if you raped a child and were convicted of that in court, I'm not sure that they would keep their job. But in circumstances of poor performance, I think that it would be difficult to get rid of the teacher. Or that what is tenure then? In your imagination, what is tenure?
American public school teachers are typically awarded tenure after a probationary period of about 3 years. Once a teacher has earned tenure, also known as due process, he or she has a right to know why a discharge is being sought by the employer and a right to have the issue decided by an impartial body. Mm-hmm. In the words of the University of Pennsylvania's Richard Ingersoll, typically tenure guarantees that teachers must be given reasoned documentation and a hearing prior to being fired. This doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world.
I've never been personally through a firing through tenure, but everything I've ever read on it, tenure equals difficult to fire.
The practice recognizes that in a mass profession like public school teaching, there will be some poor performers among the ranks of tenured teachers. Tenure does not prevent their termination, but it does require that employers show just cause, a reasonable ground for action for termination. And then based on this chart earlier that we see that was sourced from like...
the unions come in and then they bring their lawyers in and they make it impossible to fire the teacher.
Then why is it that teachers with tenure are more likely to be fired than teachers without? Like based on this chart that was sourced
I haven't seen that statistic. That's a bizarre phenomenon. I can't actually imagine that that's accurate. I mean...
Are you saying like the government is like collecting incorrect data, or maybe I'm misrepresenting it? I mean,
you think that? So you think that? Well, this data. It's not that you think. It's you're reading this data that says that if you are tenured, you are more likely to be fired. Well, it's possible. Okay, here's a speculation. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's possible that there is an absurdly higher number of teachers with tenure than there is without tenure, right? So if you have 1%, I mean, I don't think it's 1%, but let's say you have 1% of the population without tenure, even if they're fired at a much higher rate, you're still going to get more tenured, teachers fired. And it may actually differ from region to region in the country. I mean, you may have regions where just being tenured doesn't make it that difficult to get fired, or maybe the teachers unions don't fight for you, and other regions of the country, it's a much, much bigger problem. I mean, we have certain regions of the country where the education is terrible and some where it's, fairly decent. So things aren't the same everywhere all over. I don't know why that statistic would be would exist. The only thing I can think of is that there's way more tenured teachers.
Okay, I mean, I guess it's possible, but I mean, it kind of hurts to say that, like, I'm totally unprepared for this conversation because I haven't heard this argument before, but you don't even know what tenure is, and you're citing that as the primary reason why education is failing in America. I mean, that feels a little bit... I had to read you the definition. What do you mean?
Look, you're right in saying that it doesn't literally mean that you can't be fired, but that's essentially what it means often. That's typically how people talk about tenure, right? You can't fire a tenure.
Okay,
teacher.
I would be very, and I guess I'll look into this later. I've just never heard this. I'd be very curious if there are like all of these horrible teachers that are being protected by tenure, that all of our schools are just being destroyed, and that's the problem with education in America is just tenure.
You tell me what you think the problem with education in America is.
Well, I already said the fact that poor kids go to poor schools and rich kids go to rich schools is a huge fucking problem. That's really easy to understand. I can demonstrate that that's true. Like, we can look at other areas where that's probably even more likely to be borne out. So, for instance, private schools tend to be wealthier kids, and those schools have very high educational attainment, probably because the wealthier kids go there. Like, I mean...
Okay, so you and I agree that getting rid of the districting would actually alleviate the problem to some extent.
For sure.
But you cannot get behind this idea that if you get rid of tenure and you pay the good teachers well and you fire the crappy teachers, that won't improve the performance of the schools and the teachers?
I mean, maybe, but we can do this within our current system. This doesn't require like wealthy schools and poor schools or any kind of voucher system. And other countries do this without voucher systems. Like,
I actually would agree with that. I'm not sure that... I think a lot of the reason... There's a couple of reasons why privatization is better. I mean, I obviously laid out one of them, which is that you incentivize businesses to build new schools, which I think is great. You don't think that are profitable, but obviously there are private schools now. There are private chains of schools. So, obviously it is profitable. And, secondly, what the hell was my other point? I don't know the point. Shit, it's gone.
I guess like it's like I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that your idea is impossible, but it just seems like so easy when so many other countries do education a certain way and do it better than us. Why we wouldn't just copy that system rather than trying to run a whole new experiment on top of our already failing school system, especially one that could further class divides, which you yourself said is one of the biggest issues in America.
I think you and I have a sort of difference in perception as to what has been tried in America. I do think that they do try to copy the European systems in various districts in the country.
Wait, how? Our college, isn't it like $1.7 trillion of outstanding student loan debt, or like $1.4 trillion in outstanding student loan debt? How do we copy?
You're going to university level.
Sure, but even at the grade school or high school level, I don't know if we necessarily copy like the European systems for this.
No. Well, okay. Once you get into university, things change a lot because the government subsidizes universities so significantly in America that university costs are ridiculavely high. And I mean,
they subsidize them in Europe as well. Some students get paid to go to school in places like Sweden or Norway.
Well, right, but they have a restriction on how much the school can charge the student, whereas in the United States they didn't do that. So what ended up happening?
Maybe we should set that restriction.
I think you might be right. But I mean, it's a difficult situation because I would actually prefer that they just take out all the government funding from schools, right? And so then the schools would have to bring down their rate to bring in the students. But
yeah, but again, like, why do you want to run and do the one thing that nobody else in the world is doing, rather than and risk our whole education system falling apart, rather than just copying all the already successful? That's just so weird to me. It's such a weird mindset.
Again, you have a perception that we have not tried, to implement some of the stuff that they're doing in Europe. I think that we have in some cases. I don't have the data on me. I don't have an article on me, but I've definitely read about, they went to, whatever, Sweden or Germany or something, and they saw the system and it was working really well. So we tried to implement it in America or something like that. And I just haven't seen like a huge increase in the quality of public schools in America because we've looked at Europe. I mean,
Americans won't even settle for like federal guidelines on education. We won't even allow, which I'm pretty sure is probably common in most other countries, but we won't even allow something like Common Core to exist, for instance. Like, how can we possibly say that we're trying anything European in regards to our educational system?
I do think that we need to have standards for the students. I think that we should have standards for the teachers. I think that we should, but I really think that I don't see how. I'm sure, and I don't know if this is true about European schools or not. I have to look, but I'm sure they can fire bad teachers in Europe. I'm sure that they can, pay teachers relatively, better if they're amazing teachers. I don't know. I would have to look into that, but I don't see how that would not benefit the school system. You think that all the teachers are just going to flood to one school, which I don't know. That doesn't really make sense. If you could be the best teacher at your school, or like the 20th best teacher at this school, and so if you're the best teacher at this school, you get paid, whatever it is, $100,000 a year. If you're the 20th best teacher at this school, you get paid, $70,000 a year. Why wouldn't you want to be the best teacher at this other school? Like, why would all the teachers pool into one school?
Because all the money would go to that school. If you could be the #1 programmer in the state of Alabama, or you could be the number 20 programmer in San Francisco, where would you rather be?
Right. Okay, that's fair. That's totally fair. But I don't know if you would have that kind of. That's only true if this school makes a ton of money and all the students are paying more. If this school makes if all the students are essentially paying the same amount of money, because the money's tied to the student and it's sort of government subsidized, then the school just gets a set amount of money for each student. Now, I suppose there's different scenarios in terms of how much more a school can charge for students above what the government is willing to pay per student, right? So then that would actually, make certain situations where you get these super elite schools,
Sure.
I'm not exactly sure how that complicates things significantly, right? But we would have to work together to figure out what the best system is. Is there a cap on the amount?
I just see there's just so many problems with schools. The problem is that schools represent a form of geographic monopoly, and that always makes me really hesitant as a capitalist, because any capitalist should acknowledge market failures that can happen when geographic monopolies exist.
Are great.
So the same way that ISPs have a problem because you can't duplicate infrastructure at scale, right? 50 million people aren't going to lay lines all over your city. That same type of problem could potentially exist with a school, because schools represent a form of geographic monopolies as well. For instance, if a school is near you, you're not going to drive your kid 40 minutes away to go to a different school than the one that's right next to you.
Unless somebody builds another school.
But again, with a very basic understanding of economics, we understand that things like a barrier to entry exists, right? So let's say, for instance, if there are 10 competing schools, maybe the tuition would be $2,000 per student. But if we take one school, maybe the others can't exist because the cost to build a new school like that, right, because of a barrier to entry, might make it so that school could gouge everybody else in terms of tuition. And maybe even more than that, maybe that school could make it so that, let's say, for instance, it can charge $4,000 per student and have 100 students attend, or it could charge $1,000 per student and have 300 students attend, right? Well, in that case, they're incentivized under a capitalist structure to say, fuck it, we're just going to deliver services to 100 students at $4,000 a pop, and the 200 other students just don't go to school. Fuck them. Because in a for-profit system, especially one that might be guarded by a geographic monopoly, that market failure there would allow that school to fuck all of the people that are kind of geographically locked into that school district. That wouldn't necessarily happen, but I mean, that's kind of what happens with ISPs today. It's how our municipalities work. That's why they're socialized, right? Why the cities take care of them. I mean, I don't know, private education, it just hasn't been tried anywhere else. We could both sit here and brainstorm a million ways why it could fail miserably. Other countries seem to do it in a social manner, and they seem to be really effective at doing it. I just don't know why we would try the private way of doing it. It just seems really spooky to do, and it seems like there's a lot of reasons that would make something like that fail.
All right, I can end with that. We don't have a moderator, so I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
But I think you're thinking abstractly about it. I don't think you're right. I mean, I don't think that this is how things will play out. I think that if you have a region where, there's a school, a school that has a monopoly and they want to screw all the students, you're just going to get somebody else building another school. I know you think there's a barrier to entry, but with the internet and, I don't think there's a huge barrier to entry for education.
For creating a school?
Yeah, because you just need to rent a space, and then you just need one teacher or something, and you could have all the students learning online. I mean,
you need a lot of cap first. Okay, there's so many problems with what was just said. So firstly, the types of people that we would imagine would be the most impacted by this are probably the kids that are also the most likely not to have access to a school and to the internet. That's our first problem. Secondly, even if
you're talking about in America?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lot of people in America that don't have access to the internet?
Yes. That don't have access to a functioning computer and an internet connection that they can be on 24/7. Yeah, internet is fucking anywhere from $40 to $80 a month, depending on where you live. Yeah, of course. And these are probably going to be the people that are most likely not to have internet. Not to mention, would these people need babysitters then at school? Am I going to trust my 8-year-old son to really attend class for 8 hours on his computer while I go to work? Do I even trust leaving him alone if he's only 6 or 7? Do I trust leaving him alone to go to work?
Half the job of a teacher is a babysitter.
Yeah, but you can't babysit somebody online, right?
No. You would obviously have to have a real, you'd have to have adults there, but they don't necessarily have to be the teachers. I mean, there are different kinds of structured, school structures that could be more effective than the traditional structure that we have now. You're just assuming that like every school that pops up has to be like, a brick and mortar, school with seats and, chalkboard.
Well, it doesn't maybe necessarily have to, but like I'd be curious how you would deal with problems like the fact that you would have to leave kids at home with no supervision. You'd have no way to get them like
no, you're not leaving the. I don't suspect that most schools would be virtual schools with no supervision. My assumption is that you would hire people to come in to take care of the kids whilst they're learning, right? Or
that's a lot of money. Childcare is a huge amount of money to people.
You're right. But these schools are getting paid, right? They're getting paid because the money goes with the kid.
So you think it would be more efficient to have an online school where every single kid that attends that school has a personal babysitter that comes over to watch them?
Not a personal baby. No, they're not at home. You would have to rent a space, but it wouldn't have. You could. Rent a space
so like all the kids would go to like an office where there are computers and they would learn there.
Yeah, or whatever, or any kind of space. It doesn't have to be like a traditional school. Like that's like a Montessori school. They're oftentimes like in strip malls and stuff like that. They're just like spaces that people rent out with like. They become classrooms, but they're not traditionally schools.
Okay, I mean, this sounds like the most depressing, horrible school in the world, but I guess it's possible. Like going to school, mom, and you go and sit in one class.
We're talking about worst case scenario. We're talking about the difference between like because a lot of the schools right now are terrible schools.
But this is what we are talking about, worst case scenario. The United States has the best education in the world, the best healthcare in the world, and the best opportunities in the world if you're rich. We're not talking about best case scenarios. We're talking about worst case scenarios. Right. Because under the worst case, America could be a fucking shit place to live depending on where you are.
So here's a question for you. Here's a question for you. If you have a bunch of students who have a beautiful playground and a football field and all kinds of beautiful amenities, but the teachers are terrible, right? Or another option number two, they're in a strip mall in a crappy little office, but the teachers are awesome and the education is awesome. Which should we send the kids to?
Probably the one with the better teachers. I just don't see how the private system will get all those teachers there. But I mean, I think we kind of talked around this topic to death.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's I don't know if either of us are gonna budge at all, but maybe a little bit of reading and we can get back to it.
Sure. Do you have any other big topics, or do you want to cut it here, or what else you got?
No, I don't really have. I mean, we didn't talk really anything about the cultural impact of immigration, but at this point, I think we've done enough.
I'm curious. Give me your elevator pitch on the cultural impact of immigration. I'm just curious because I've heard these arguments a lot.
Sure. Well, I do think that there is a legitimate argument to make that, people who aren't not able to integrate into, American culture will presumably either attempt or by default shift the culture.
What kind of what do you mean when you say integrate into American culture? What are the types of people that can't integrate into our culture, and what kind of culture are you talking about?
Well, people who don't speak the language and people who are so committed to their own culture that they just want to exist within that culture. So it used to be that you would bring in immigrants and then they would just acclimate to American culture. And this tends to happen a lot of times, even today with certain groups. I mean, Europeans, I don't know of any. It's very rare that you find like a group of European immigrants that aren't like Russian. Okay, so like it's very rare that I see like a little German area of Los Angeles or something like that. But you will find like a Mexican area, or in Michigan, obviously you have different cultures that will create isolated groups, right?
Sure.
Because a lot of them don't speak the language.
Okay, it seems like by like the third generation. So I'm just grabbing public policy.
You're absolutely right. Once you get past the first or second generation, it does start that mitigate.
Yeah, like 90% of these people seem to be able to speak
English. I 100% agree with that. But depending on how many immigrants you're getting, I mean, if you have an insane number of immigrants, that may change, right? And not only might that change, but do we really want to wait a generation or two generations or three generations? And you're always going to have these ever expanding groups of immigrants that prefer to live within their isolated group. I don't think that's healthy for our culture. And
wait, okay, hold on. There's like a lot of like weird statements. What do you mean like healthy for our culture? Like if they come here and they work here and they speak the language, what do you mean by like not?
Okay, well, this is going to be. Well, no, it's if they don't speak the language, that's really the
sure,
the
which
difference.
we both agree is important. You should probably have to speak the language. I think for first generation people, it's like only 70% do, but by like third generation, it's like 90% do.
I think in my thinking, I think a lot of people just prefer to not have to shift their aesthetic or their lifestyle toward another culture that comes in and moves into their town.
Yeah, but that's
right?
kind of like, that's just how the world works. What do you mean cultures are always changing? There's no possible way that you can freeze a culture in like a glass vase.
I
and
actually
never
agree
change.
with that, but it's like a rate of change, right? And I think that there is some resentment that people have over the lack of respect that foreigners have for the culture they're moving into.
Wait, like
Sometimes.
lack of respect for what culture?
Okay, like if you went to Japan, right, and you refuse to integrate in any way, you refuse to learn the language, you refuse to engage in any kind of Japanese cultural thing, you only spoke to other Americans, and you went to American shops, and you dressed like an American, and you listen to American music, and blasting American music from your car, and you essentially are rejecting the culture in which you live, but you live there because of economic opportunity, something like that. To me, that would kind of be a little bit disrespectful of the culture that you're moving into. You're kind of forcing them to accommodate you, as opposed to accommodating them for moving into their region.
Sure. So I'm not going to use Japan as an example because Japan has been cited multiple times as being literally one of the most racist countries on the planet. So I don't really want to.
Right, well, I'm not okay. The feelings of the Japanese are irrelevant here.
Sure,
right?
but like I don't understand.
Moving into the country.
Assuming somebody speaks the language, that's a big thing for me, and I probably break with most liberals on that, or Democrats on that. I think you should have to speak the language to be here, because fuck everything if you can't speak the language. Holy shit. But like, assuming you can speak the language, like what other important tenets are there of American culture that you need to assimilate into that like people can't do? I mean, that doesn't seem to be like a difficult thing to do.
That they can't do it. It's not that they can't do it. I actually think that anybody from anywhere in the world can do it. The question is, are they willing to do it? And not everybody is.
Well, but I mean, it seems like they do. Generally, immigrants seem to integrate pretty well into American society.
Like the second or third generation starts to immigrate. To me, that's not a great argument, because you still have this huge gap of time in which you have to deal with this other culture that's sort of forcing itself on you.
But
in
we already
country.
have like 50 million different cultures in America. What's wrong with that? And if anything, it seems like we appreciate these other cultures anyway. I don't know where you live. I live in LA.
I would like to.
People go down to K-Town to eat. People go down to
Here's my biggest
Chinatown in New York. I mean, like, there's tons of these different like little enclaves of people that people visit for food or entertainment or whatnot. And if
Right,
as
but
long
you
as
have two different groups in America. You have the people who really love and appreciate a variety of different cultures, and I'm actually one of those people. To be perfectly honest, I love the exotic. I love other cultures. I love that kind of stuff. I love traveling. But then you have another group of people that they do not want their culture infringed upon by all of these other cultures, and I actually respect that idea that they shouldn't have to change because other people are moving in. And
how are they making them change? If you want to celebrate your own whatever culture, you can still do that. Nobody's like.
Okay, so let's look at all the different cultures in the world, right? Everywhere you go, South America, the Middle East, Asia, Africa, you will have a kind of like an upper class culture and like a lower class culture. In many of these places, you have multiple different cultures and different strata, right? And most of the people who come in, they're coming in to make a better life. So they're not like the upper crust culture, right? They're usually like poorer people bringing their specific culture in, right? And so sometimes a lower class culture, whether it be white, black, whatever, it's like uglier than the higher class culture, right? It's a little bit grittier and louder and more obnoxious, right? That's true of white culture as well as every other culture. So when like Trump says, we're not getting their best, I think that's kind of what he means. And people don't want to just experience like, this guy's culture because he, this guy came over to America. And honestly, I like going to a new restaurant with different food and that kind of stuff, but not everybody likes that. Not everyone wants to see the aesthetic of their town change. I don't have a problem with somebody who prefers a particular aesthetic or particular lifestyle. They've lived here for generations. That's what it's like. If I moved into their town, I'm not going to force my aesthetic ideas on them. And this is not just a culture change. People do tend to be a little bit classist. And maybe that's ugly and maybe that's terrible, but that's the way a lot of people are. That's the way they like things. In Oregon, where I'm from, we have a lot of people from California come up and they want to build these big mansions and they have the specific aesthetic, and the people who are there really hate it. Now, is this like the best argument against allowing people to come in? No, but I think that it is one of many, many, many arguments that you could make that say, look, are you actually just infringing on the happiness, the quality of life on this group by bringing this other group in? If the answer is yes, that these people's quality of life is worse, maybe you should think about whether or not you're letting those people in.
Okay, so firstly, when Trump said we're not getting their best, the problem wasn't that Trump said we're not getting their best. The problem was that he said that they were rapists, thieves, and murderers, and some of them are good people. Okay, that was that specific quote. So you made it sound like
let me flip that and say some of them are rapists and murderers.
You've got like 20 points you brought up. I have to respond to them, okay?
No, you're right.
That's the first problem. The problem wasn't that we're not getting their best. The problem was that a lot of these people, Trump was making it sound like most of these people that came in were literally criminals. So firstly, it was stupid because it made it sound like a lot of the people that were immigrating were literally criminals. The fact that these people are more predisposed to crime towards native populations has never been borne out in any fucking piece of literature ever.
No, I've seen studies.
I can literally bring on like the Cato Institute guy that like does all of these.
Yeah, the Cato Institute guy. That's the guy. That's the guy that everybody cites. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, because they're libertarians and they obsess over immigration, but they do like a fuck ton of studies on it. This has just not been borne out. Firstly, secondly, the idea that we're not getting their best, that's actually not even true. We get the best of a lot of countries. In order to be able to make these transatlantic or trans-Pacific flights to the United States, you're already selecting for a very, 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 very high percentage of the population already. Like people say things like, "Oh, well, why are Chinese people in America so fucking smart?" Do you think the average like Chinese like subsistence farmer or factory worker is this ingenious person? Of course not. The people that come here from other countries are coming here because they're incredibly fucking wealthy. That's why so many Chinese people or Asian people dominate our institutions. That's why when you see like a Nigerian on the street, there's like a 62% chance or whatever this guy has like a PhD, right? Because these people that come from these other countries are actually the best of their countries, and they self-select coming to the United States because they have the economic means to do so. So that statement's like offensive on one end and just wrong on the other end. Firstly. Secondly,
I don't mean to be offensive, but let me counter with this.
Well, I can't.
You are right.
Wait. No, wait. Hold on. No. You can write these down, but I got because you have two other big points that I have to respond to. Okay, you can write this down and then you can respond to this one. Okay. Secondly, the idea that immigrants are always lower class, right? I've already said that's not true. Firstly. Secondly, we have lower class communities in the United States, and it seems like the lower class communities are the ones that fight against immigration the hardest. It's people who are, not to be mean, but people like rednecks or white trash or whatever. These are the people that seem to fight the most, that have like the poorest cultures, the highest amount of addiction to opioids or fentanyl. What
neighborhoods are the immigrants moving into? They're not moving into rich people's neighborhoods. I mean, the rich ones are. But look, rich people don't give a crap.
Wait, well, let me finish. Firstly, they tend to move into urban areas. They don't move into rural areas. They tend to move into urban areas. And the people that most heavily oppose immigration, spoiler alert, come from rural areas where they don't even fucking see immigrants, okay? So firstly, the idea that there's some culture that they're not meshing with, when the culture of rural people tends to be one of addicted to fentanyl, the white trash redneck stuff, low income, high dependency on state funding, because guess what? It's the rural communities in all of the red states that take way more federal funding than they give in. That's like an easily demonstrable fact, right? The idea that these are the people that are most against immigration for the reasons that you cited is hilarious because they exhibit all of the problems that are trying to keep these other people from coming that they claim those people have. So that's like, and then the third final thing is not everyone wants to see their aesthetic change. Who cares? The idea that you can prevent your cultural aesthetic from changing is hilarious. It is laughable. It will never happen. The aesthetic that exists today only exists because it was a rebellion to some previous aesthetic that only exists because it was a rebellion to some previous aesthetic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People will sit here and harken back to the days of old, to the positive aesthetic. I remember back when Journey and the Eagles and all of these people, this was real American culture. Those guys were losers to a lot of the mainstream, like, heavy business Americans back then. These people came out of hippie culture. They came out of like Woodstock. They came like the idea that like you want to freeze culture at some particular point in time and say it'll never change, blah, 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 is hilariously dumb. Culture has never and will never work that way. Okay, those are the three main things I wanted to respond to. Go for it.
Oh man, that's a lot of stuff. I mean, I agree with you for the most part. You're right about everything you said. I don't think it's a great argument, but I do think that it is valid. It's something that we should concern ourselves with. It's not something we should dismiss. It's not something we should say, who cares, right? I don't want to go into like a neighborhood in which everybody listens to hip hop and they have a very particular style and say, actually, no, you guys are going to have to listen to classical. My loud classical music.
That doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't happen. But
nobody is forcing you to listen to different types of music.
Oh, they absolutely. Okay, you live in California.
Yeah, I can listen to whatever music I want to.
Well, maybe because you stay inside a lot. But if you go outside, you are bombarded by. Well, look, you don't have to live in the cities. So you don't have to necessarily, live in like a super multicultural area. But if you're you're acting like there's no rural areas that get bombarded by immigrants. That's absolutely false. That does happen, and it's a lot of the reason why a lot of these people don't like, the mass immigration. the wealthy people that are coming in, the
okay.
doctors and the lawyers and stuff like that, right? And you're right. There's a lot of the best that we do get. We do get a lot of the best, right? Those people live in relatively wealthy neighborhoods. Those people are like very clean people, very responsible people. They're very charming people. They speak English well. They're the kind of people that you want in America. No one is complaining about the, brilliant computer programmer or doctor or lawyer that's immigrating to America. Nobody's complaining about those people. We're literally just talking about the really like low-skilled laborers that come in. I mean, that's the only people. And look, I'm not saying that they have no value. Of course they have value, and of course you want to help them. But you have to be careful about where you're bringing these people in from, because you want the best of that group too, right? So like I would say, I'll give you an example. I guess my big point that I want to make is that if we could choose where the people are coming from, and we could choose specifically what people are coming from those areas, instead of just like letting people come in because they're somebody's dad or brother, then we'd be a lot better off. Like, so for instance, my girlfriend is Russian, right? And she came here from Russia, and she immediately got ripped off. Somebody stole her car. She got a job, but it was for $5 an hour. I kid you not, it was for $5 an hour because she was working for other immigrants. And immigrants know, especially like Russians or people like this, they know that other immigrants are not savvy enough to know what the laws are, and they're too scared to go to the police. So there's a huge problem, and nobody ever really talks about this. There's a huge problem with like crime and exploitation that happens in these immigrant communities.
First of all, this is something that everybody talks about, and it's one of the huge critiques of the Trump administration trying to add a citizenship question on the Census Bureau right now. This is absolutely something that people
No. We're talking about, we tend to be talking about the exploitation of like human trafficking and stuff like that. We don't tend to talk about
Yes, but the reason why a lot of these people are scared to go to the cops is because in some places they try to turn these immigrants over to ICE. This is a huge problem.
They're talking specifically about illegal immigrants, but I mean even regular immigrants that aren't illegal. If you come over, you don't speak English particularly well, and you come from a country like Russia, which is very corrupt, some people who have been here for like 5 or 10 years, who know the system and know how naive some of the people are that are coming over, they will exploit them. And it's despicable, and it's awful. And so I would say, like, look, I actually like Russians. I have great Russian friends. My girlfriend's Russian. It's great, but it's a corrupt country. And if you're bringing people from a corrupt country, they're used to living in a society in which they have to act corrupt. They have to pay bribes. They have to do kind of nefarious, sneaky things. And if you bring them into a country that's not, people aren't used to dealing with that kind of stuff, regular Americans are super vulnerable to that, because we're not used to people coming over and acting a bit nefarious. Like you don't go to a restaurant and, get served by a girl and think she's getting paid $5 an hour. You think she's getting paid minimum wage.
Well, technically minimum wage per server is $2.13 an hour, but I know what you're saying. I guess like, the very first thing you said is that we shouldn't dismiss bad arguments. I mean, like, I agree with you that you have to like talk to people that have these problems, but I'm never, ever, ever going to enact or push for policy that takes these shit arguments into account. Like,
okay, you can dismiss the argument if you want. Just calling it a shit argument doesn't actually make it a shit argument. You got to give me a reason why it's a shit argument.
Sure, saying I don't want to go outside and hear other music is a bad argument because
you're going back to that. You're going back to that, and I will say yes, it's a weak argument. But it is definitely something to consider, because, I think it's a cruel thing to do, to go into a village in the rainforest and put in a McDonald's and just completely change the culture of some indigenous tribe.
But I don't think that's generally what happens. Like, we can look at maps of like where immigrants go in the United States, and it's usually to large cities. The idea that like all of these immigrants are going to these small rural towns, I don't think typically happens.
It doesn't. Okay, so.
I mean, like, I can shoot you, like, here's like a map where all the immigrants in the U.S. go. You can click on any big state, and you see all of the red counties are going to be like the super high population counties are going to be like where the big cities are. It's not like they're just going to random spots in like, Utah or Wyoming or something, right?
No, I do think that happens sometimes, but I also think, like, let's say it's a black community in, Detroit, and then you bring in a bunch of, Islamic, Arabs or, Syrians, or you bring in people from Mexico, and that changes their culture or something like that. These kinds of things can cause culture clashes. People, multiculturalism doesn't always work as well as people want it to. It can maybe over time, but certain cultures, it's difficult for them to interact reasonably well together all the time. And I'm not saying it can't work ever. I'm saying sometimes it doesn't work that well, and you have to take people people's lifestyles into account, their quality of life into account. Okay, forget Mexicans or Muslims or whoever it is that people typically talk about with these things. Let's just talk about Martians, right? Let's say we bring in Martians, and the Martians that we're bringing in are particularly undesirable in terms of, the people who we're sending them to this particular place, the people that live there don't particularly want them there. Why should we force these people to? The problem with rich people.
Do you think that it's strange that the argument and the analogy that you just used, I said earlier that sometimes people use analogies that kind of betray an underlying thought process. Do you think it's weird that the analogy that you used for an immigrant is something that's not human? Or is that just like random chance, do you think?
No, there's nothing. I'm just trying to find something that's not racial, right? It's not racial. It's just like an outside group with like a different culture. Look, I don't necessarily think that somebody who finds another person's culture unappealing. Look, at the end of the day, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about one culture not finding another culture appealing, but being forced to tolerate that other culture.
That's kind of America. I mean, like, that's what our country is. We've got a fuck ton of different cultures here. I've got to deal with other shit white cultures, and other white cultures have to deal with me. And Mexicans come here, and Chinese people come here.
You're right. I'm trying to mitigate that problem as much as I can by
destroying our economy, by making economic sacrifices because we're too scared that people can't get along.
I'm not saying that we don't bring in immigrants. I'm saying that we're choosy about where we bring in immigrants from.
But that doesn't make any sense, because even the ways that people want to be choosy aren't even the ways that would be the most economically beneficial. So, for instance, every country, every member state of the EU knows this, and the United States knows this, that bringing in low-skilled labor is actually a really important way to bolster your economy, because that's how our economy...
I'm not saying you can't bring in low-skilled labor. I'm saying that you bring in low-skilled labor from regions of the world that are like low crime and that have a similar culture to the United States, as close as you can. Right? And you just have a priority level, right? You have a priority level of these are the countries that we are most likely to bring people in from, and these are the countries that are least likely
I would agree with you if it seemed like that's the way that people were making decisions. So, for instance, there are certain European countries like Germany or Sweden where I would say I'd be a little bit critical of bringing in a lot of immigrants from certain states in, say, North Africa, where I would say, like, okay, yeah, this is definitely true. But when people are applying this, like, broadly to Hispanics in the United States, when Hispanics aren't overrepresented for crime almost anywhere, where all of the tables based on immigrants committing crimes and whatnot show that they tend to commit less crime than native populations. Like, I don't know, that just seems like such a weird argument to use for the goal of like keeping so many immigrants out of the United States that don't seem to fit this profile of being like high in crime.
Well, I don't necessarily just think it's a crime situation, although I do think that's a part of the problem. I do think it's a poverty problem. I do think like bringing in low skilled, low income, low IQ people is not going to be helpful to the problems that we already have here.
But it seems to be. It just seems to be that way economically.
It grows the economy. It grows the economy.
Yeah. Unless you want to make it
grow the economy at the expense of other poor people that are already here.
Not generally, although to very hyper-specific groups of people. So people of a certain age, like 18 to 24, that don't have a high school education, over like a number of years, their income can be adversely affected. Like these very, very minor findings are usually what people quibble over. But the idea that all these people become unemployed or can't find work or are losing like, a lot of money or whatever, it's just not borne out anywhere in any of the literature. It just doesn't happen. Like we can look at polls from IGM, from the Economic Forum, we can look at all the leading economists that go back and forth on these debates. Borjas isn't debating with people, isn't debating, whether or not like millions of people are losing jobs to immigrants. It's over whether or not like the wage impact to like unskilled laborers is like 2% or 4% over like a 10-year period. Like these are where the debates are. It's not this idea that low-skilled immigration is destroying the workforce of America.
I don't think that it is. I don't think that there is a net loss over time. Right? Over time, you increase your workforce. It's sort of like, it's like you said in the debate that you had with Lauren Southern, right? It is like a natural resource, bringing in human resources, right? But the question is, there are different areas in which they're better. There's no reason to bring in a bunch of people some of whom are going to be a net drain on the economy, and a few are going to be a net gain on the economy, and then say, okay, well, we have had a net gain. Right? You can have a net gain of $1, or you can only bring in people that are valuable, and you could have a net gain of $1 million.
But that's just not how that works. It doesn't make any sense. Like you can't just say like we're only going to take people that are never going to commit crime, or like we can't. There's no way to know that unless we have like.
There isn't. But I do think that we can be better about it. I think that there is this fear of being called racist by excluding certain groups or certain people from different countries.
Because it always seems to come back to racial motivations. When somebody tells me like, well, we need to be careful about immigrants because they're hurting the economy and they are criminals, and it's like, okay, well, all of the literature says they're a boon to the economy and they're committing less crime than natives. It's like, well, wait, well, what actually are your arguments?
No, there's conflicting studies that I've seen, and I know a lot of it comes from this guy from Cato, and he's constantly pushing this idea that immigrants don't commit as much crime. But then you do have contradictory analyses of the crime that is committed in America, and it's just totally dismissed by the left. It's dismissed by anybody who just wants to dismiss it. Right? Oh, no. Immigrants never commit crime. They're all perfect angels. I mean, it's absolutely.
No one says immigrants never commit crime. They're perfect angels. It's just generally they're not coming over as rapists, thieves, and murderers like Donald Trump would have us believe.
I am exaggerating your perspective, but you, I think, are exaggerating Trump's perspective.
I just quoted Trump. That's literally what he said.
He didn't say all.
He said there are. That when Mexico sends its immigrants, they're not sending their best. They're sending rapists, thieves, and murderers, and some of them are good people, I assume.
When he was saying that, he literally pointed to immigrants, and he said, they're not sending all people like you. He was specifically talking about a particular group that were like, these guys are great. These are the kind of people that we want, right? And then he says, but there are a lot of people that are coming over. I mean, the securing the border situation is a little bit different than the immigration issue anyway. Right, the securing the border issue, when we're specifically talking about illegal immigrants, it's a very different conversation than all immigrants.
Yeah, but even at that, it seems like Republicans don't want to make much progress. Like, if you really wanted to deal with the illegal immigrant problem, why wouldn't we give amnesty to the people here right now so that we can get them documented and track them? That seems to be something the Republicans fight against constantly, and all they're doing is shooting themselves in the foot for it. And then when Republicans get up on stage and say things like, well, we want the good immigrants here, why are they attacking DACA recipients? Why are they attacking people that...
Rationally speaking, there is an argument against amnesty, which is that there is a concern that if you give amnesty to the people here, other people will jump over, be illegal here for 10 or 20 years or however long they need to be here in order to get amnesty, and they'll get amnesty too, right? You sort of incentivize people to cheat.
Well,
there's
firstly,
another issue which is less rational, which is it's just unjust, and Americans really hate things that are unjust.
Okay, so firstly. Okay, that's a big philosophy one. So firstly, the argument that more people will come here, okay, well then why don't we revamp our immigration policy in line with giving amnesty to people that are already here? Like, and even if we were to say that, like, well, theoretically more illegal people could come here in the future, they already do come here, okay? They're not coming here because they think in the future they'll get a green card. They're here because they think there's better opportunities available for them and their families and there are other places they're coming from. Firstly. Secondly, the amount of people coming here illegally has decreased anyway. The net flow of Mexicans has gone negative in this country over the past like 6 or 7 years. I think from like 2013 onwards, there have been less people from Mexico here than have even entered, because that's reversing, because Mexico's fixing its shit and it's doing better as a country. Secondly, thirdly, even if it meant in the future that more people could come here, who cares? There are 13 million illegal people here right now that we could bring in more coherently under our tax base, that we could monitor with the Census Bureau so that we could get these people like actually accounted for in cities and districts. Like, it would make so much more sense to bring them in, to just say, fuck it, here's amnesty, join the fucking tax base in a more official capacity so that we can monitor and track everybody so we don't have to deal with all this bullshit. And also so we don't fuck up the local economies of all these areas that you'd be deporting these immigrants from. Every single person knows this. Even Republicans know.
You've given a huge variety of arguments in favor of amnesty, and all of them are valid, but you have not addressed the problem of incentivization of new illegal immigrants.
Or they're already incentivized. They come here anyway.
That's true, but you would... Okay, so you're saying that there's no amount of incentivization that would increase, people coming to the United States.
No, but I don't think the incentivization is a legal one. I think it's an economic opportunity one, or one where you're fleeing like a criminal area. So, for instance, when people come here to work, they're not coming here thinking like, oh, well, maybe I can get my green card. It's more, I probably won't get caught. So,
all right. Let's you and I right now. Okay, let's solve this problem. Right, all of Congress can follow our lead. I will give amnesty to everybody if we do two things, all right? We've got to enact the E-Verify system. Every single employer has to follow E-Verify, right? They cannot hire illegals ever, right? And secondly, we absolutely secure the border so that no illegals can get in. And we literally have to kick out all of the criminals, all illegal criminals. We just kick them out, send them back to whatever country they're from. And then let's talk about, I'll give you amnesty to whoever, right? No more illegal immigrants ever coming in, right? And make sure we kick out all the bad ones.
As long as you're willing to throw in open borders on top of that, then sure. I think our immigration policy right now is far too restrictive than what it needs to be. I think that people should be immigrating for economic reasons. As long as our welfare state isn't too high, if more immigrants want to come up to the United States and work, then fuck it, go for it. Our agricultural industry greatly benefits from it. Even in California, where people think of us as a tech state, this is fucking. There's a huge percentage of our economy. I wish I remember that. It's like 30 or 40% or whatever. It's a massive percentage of the economy is done via agriculture, and a lot of this is like powered by the labor of immigrants. Like, yeah, if you want to like close the borders up and make everybody here legal, that's fine. I don't know about the e-verify stuff. I don't know if that would cost a lot for employers to do or what all that entails. If that just sounds like a costly, I'm generally not in favor of like government bloat for the sake of government bloat. But I mean,
come on, you know that would be effective. You know, there's be far fewer people that would come up to try to work if there was a huge fines against companies who did not employ, e-verify all of their employees.
I mean, it's already illegal to hire illegal immigrants, right? They're already like
enforced.
What?
It's barely enforced.
What do you mean?
There's no real good way of enforcing that. If you had an e-verify system, it would be much easier to enforce that. Right now, it's just basically kind of like everybody kind of just like turns a blind eye.
But why wouldn't you just like no, no, if you get caught, there are fines for this. But like, why if somebody was going to hire an illegal, why wouldn't they just not e-verify them?
Say that again.
Why, for the record, I'm not against this on dogma or something. I'm just curious. Right. Let's say somebody wants to like hire an illegal immigrant and you work at McDonald's and you just don't e-verify them. Like, who's going to catch you for that?
Well, right. I think that you there would be I assume that you would have to have people come around and check and stuff like that. I think
this sounds like, and again, I'm sorry, like maybe this is our difference because I'm a massive capitalist. This sounds like a hugely new institute of the government that you would have to create. So you're going to create a new branch of not a branch of the government. You're going to create like a new like commission or federal body that's going to go to every place of employment and like manually check to see if all of your employees.
You already have this. A lot of this is done with with people who will what do you call it? Like rat out their employer or whatever.
Well, yeah, but we can already do that without having like another like agency of the government.
Yeah. I don't know what the fines are right now. I don't know what, what happens to a company if it turns out that they have, there's somebody who's been working for them illegally. But obviously there's not it's not like a huge deal because...
Well, I mean, we can talk about the fines. So the fines are, the first offenders can be fined $250 to $2,000 per illegal employee for a first offense. Second offense is $2,000 to $500,000 per illegal employee. And 3 or more offenses can cost you $3,000 to $10,000 per illegal employee. A pattern of knowingly employing illegal immigrants can mean extra fines and up to 6 months in jail for an employer.
Do you think that's enforced?
I mean, I haven't seen evidence to the contrary. If you get caught by the federal government doing it, then probably. I don't think that these are referred in all cases. Like in sanctuary cities, you probably don't refer these to like the federal government, but...
Okay, so, yeah. Why are there illegal immigrants in America currently if they can't find work, if they have no way of making any money?
Well, wait, I think most of the illegals that come here to work.
Right, so they are working somehow.
Yeah, I would imagine so, yeah.
So we have ineffective governance in terms of that particular law.
For sure. I mean, but if you were to tell me like the difference is we could create a massive agency of the federal government to manually check places of employment for illegals, or just make
already have ISIS. I mean, we have ISIS.
Wait, but ICE, right?
I just think under a system in which I don't know, we could more effectively go after these businesses.
Why not just make it so that it's, instead of doing this like bullshit, and again, like I'm a markets guy generally, why not just let like labor solve itself? Like let immigrants like allocate themselves to the areas where they find that they have the most economic opportunity and just do that and say, fuck it, make it easier to immigrate to the United States. Like if you want to come here and you want to work, yeah, fuck it, have a green card, like get to work.
I in some ways I actually kind of agree with that, but I would say that, oh, hold on, I think my camera got screwed up. Okay, I'm frozen. But I think there's a fundamental problem with bringing in a bunch of immigrants and saying that we don't need to, illegal immigrants, and saying that we don't need to regulate this in any way whatsoever, because what you end up with is like a really low wage workforce, right? And so we have a minimum wage in America. Some people say people need to get paid a living wage or something like that. To me, it's like, well, yeah, that's the minimum wage, right? So
the minimum wage is not a living wage at all. But go ahead.
Okay, fine. But this idea that we think that the lowest paid people should at least have some decent quality of life in America, is completely contradicted by this idea of let's bring in tons of immigrants with like who get paid like whatever crap from employers.
Well, it might be that the lowest quality of life available in America is still going to be of a higher quality than the lives they're living down south. The alternative, for me to accept your argument, you would literally be saying that people are coming here knowing that they're going to live worse lives than the what they live.
I agree with you. Look, I do think that a lot of these people have a better life, sometimes at the expense of people who are already here. But so here's a question: do we want to bring in a bunch of people who we improve their lives a bit? Another group of people who we reduce their quality of life a bit? Some companies make a lot of money off of it, or some people have, cheaper labor or whatever it is. Or do we want to have a system where we, in fact, actually regulate and we say, look, this is the quality of life. This is the lowest standard of quality of life that we're willing to accept in America. And we're going to try to bring everybody up to that level.
Why wouldn't we just allow people to come up, and if it grows the overall economy, modify our tax position so that people are benefiting all around? If we both agree that our economy grows overall and we can bring in cheap labor in order to grow our economy, why wouldn't we continue to do that? And then we can address inequalities using our tax policy like we already do, as opposed to the other option where we say, well, don't immigrate here. We're only going to keep certain people here so that you artificially you raise wage floors, right? So that people here might be making more money, and then companies like, fuck it, we'll just ship these factories to the south then, and we'll just import our stuff since all the workers are down there.
See, I actually think that's a reasonable solution. Like, let's say
that's because that's what most economists say. That's all I'm parroting.
Right, but I'm saying, okay, let's say that you stop immigration completely. You stop all of the lowest wage, lowest skilled people from coming in, right?
Wait, I'm gonna refresh your camera real quick. It might cut us off for a second. One sec. Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I think your camera is still frozen on the Google call. You can click the turn camera off and turn it on button, and it might restart it. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's my OBS froze. Oh well, life goes on.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Go for it.
Sorry, people watching. You can't see me move. That's all right. We'll live. There's several solutions to this that I think would actually work reasonably well. But I think opening the borders up to just about anyone who wants to come here and not making sure that we're having the best people come in is just a missed opportunity, right? You just have so much wasted opportunity in bringing in the people that you want here as a people who just, as opposed to people who...
We keep going back to this, but this is still like a fundamental misunderstanding of the economic situation. Like when you say people we want, like we want anybody that wants to work, like for economically, like in our system, that's what we want. We want to grow the supply.
Not necessarily. We want people who will fill jobs that are needed.
Well, but jobs are created when you have more supply of labor available. Like this idea that people only come in to fill currently existing jobs, that's not even necessary.
Here's a real simple idea that kind of gets to the core of what I'm saying. If you have two countries, and both of which have a huge pool of unskilled laborers, and one country has super high crime and the other has really low crime, do you think that bringing in the people from the country with really low crime isn't going to be better than bringing in the people with high, from the countries with high crime?
I mean, it really depends. Sometimes crime is a result of failing institutions. And if the institutions in America are still somewhat successful, then you wouldn't expect them to bring that crime over. So, I mean, it really depends. So, for instance, let's look at...
Unless the people have acclimated to that reality.
Nobody acclimates to the reality of wanting to have crime around them. Like, let's say...
It's not wanting to have crime. It's not wanting to have crime. You have to acclimate. Okay, to survive in Russia, you have to act. You have to give bribes. You have to do things that would be considered corrupt in America, right? And you have the people that come over here from Russia and they cheat and they steal and they commit all kinds of things that we would absolutely qualify as crimes, but in Russia are kind of considered normal. And look, this is not me talking. I mean, Russian people will talk about this openly.
So if I were to look up stats right now, you're telling me that the majority, Russians have a higher incarceration rate than other immigrant groups in the United States? Do you think this is actually true?
It's a good question. I don't know, because I don't know if this is widely reported. I don't know because it's very unlikely that an immigrant who's being exploited is going to report it. Or that, somebody's going to because a lot of these groups, they just kind of act within their own little circles and nobody knows about it except for the people within those circles.
Okay, so the Russians are coming over, but they're secretly corrupt and not everybody sees it.
I think that they're pretty clever about it. Yeah. And they're not committing crimes that are they're not murdering people. I mean, I don't think that all kinds of corruption is this is one of the big problems with bringing in crime from other countries. It's like the victim country, or the country that's getting these people coming in, they're not always prepared to look for the kind of crimes that are being committed, right? If you look at like what happened with Sweden, right? They brought in all these immigrants and they had this really generous welfare program. The reason they had the generous welfare program is because nobody really went on welfare, right? It was considered sort of taboo, or it was considered ugly to go on welfare. And then you had all these immigrants come in and they had no qualms about going on welfare. So they would get a job and they would work 40 hours a week and they would be on welfare, which if you were a Swede, that would be really embarrassing that you were doing that because it was fraud, right?
Wait, you think no Swedish people ever go on welfare?
No, I didn't say no Swedish people. It's just there is no expectation that a person's going to go willfully on welfare in Sweden because it's considered to be culturally embarrassing to do it. It's not embarrassing.
Isn't that kind of the same in the United States? Don't we make fun of people with EBT or whatever, like in the US? Like,
your group might. People that I grew up with might. But not every culture is like that in America, no.
Wait, like which cultures?
I don't know. I mean, you do have people who kind of brag about their, how much welfare they get.
If they're on welfare, is it really embarrassing? Welfare, like social benefits, like unemployment or stuff like that.
Like if they get help.
Yeah, is it like super embarrassing for them?
Can you tell me an example?
I don't know, like if you're really poor and you need like funding from the government.
No.
It's not like super embarrassing.
No.
Okay.
Why?
I'm just curious.
Where's she from?
From Sweden, from Stockholm. Okay, I don't know about this because I can't speak to like the culture of like Russia or Sweden or talk about like undocumented like potential like Russian people that are acting corrupt in ways that nobody sees because like the government can't track it because they don't tell the police. I don't know like how I can even begin to address like.
All I'm trying to say is that there are some cultures that act in certain ways that we would consider corrupt in America, but we're not prepared to look for that kind of
I guess it's just, it seems like you're unwilling to divorce like the country that these people come from the people themselves. Like, it's not like Mexico came up here and now like the Mexican cartels are running LA and running like New York City or whatever. Like, for the most part, these people don't seem to come up as criminals. If anything, it seems like most of the illegal or a lot of the illegal activity in Mexico is spurred on by American policy, like the war on drugs, for instance, if anything.
I do think that there is a lot of corruption that you're not aware of because people do it covertly, right? A lot of people are very careful about getting caught because, okay, if you're going to get caught, right, and you're an immigrant, you're probably going to be deported. So a lot of the time, people will, engage in kind of nefarious activity, which they know they can't get caught by, which an American probably wouldn't do just because they have a different sort of like standard of, what behavior is acceptable.
Okay. All right, I think this is a good.
This is a difficult argument to make because it's you can't really prove that it's true or that it's not true, right? It's just something that you have to know about from talking to people.
I get it. Just seems like the easiest policy to go with that would by far be the easiest to implement and have the lowest overhead would be something like fucking amnesty for the people that are here, bring them in under like the legal tax base so we can account for and document everybody, make it a lot easier to immigrate to the country because people come here illegally anyway. Then we don't have to waste all this stupid money on enforcement. We don't have to waste all this time, worrying about if somebody's illegal or not. You just have them here working and doing their thing. Like, it just seems like such an easier way with so many less headaches to deal with these problems. And if there's crime or anything like that, then we can deal with it with our current institutions. I mean, even the idea that like people are more likely to be a criminal coming from somewhere else when we already have like the highest incarceration rate of the world is like, even that idea is like very strange to me. So I don't know. It just seems like making everything easier would be better, I guess.
There are literally billions of people in the world that are below poverty, right? I mean, they consider it to be, I think, like half the world or almost half the world, right?
Sure.
With that kind of diversity, that many people from all around the world, you're saying that we should just let anybody who wants to come work here, and we have.
If they can find a job, yeah. Hell yeah.
Okay, you don't think that would bankrupt the country if everyone who was poor who wanted to work in America came over here?
Firstly, not everybody can get here, okay? Poor people in Africa aren't going to have the money for an international flight. So firstly, but secondly, yeah, the economy would continue to grow. That's how capitalism works. If you grow your resources, you grow your economy. That's what's happened in the United States. How many people did we have in this country? U.S. population, 1960, right? We had, whoops, sorry. We had 180 million people then, and I mean our population has almost doubled, and we're still chugging along. We're still the superpower of the world. Like, yeah, you grow your population, you grow your labor, you have new businesses open up, like people make more money, the economy grows, tax wealthy people a little bit more so that they don't have so much money compared to everybody else, and then yeah, that's how America has grown.
Yeah, I'm not against immigration in total, right? But this idea that we're going to just bring in everybody who from wherever, and we don't care where they're from, we don't care who they are, we don't really care, we just like let them in, let them do their thing.
Okay, let's say that I could, for instance,
your immigration, you're not optimizing.
Let's say that I could optimize their immigration and enact a policy that would be discriminatory towards some groups of people, and I could
totally discriminatory.
Yeah, and let's say I could do it, and I could get rid of like 95% of violent crime offenders. Are these the types of policies that you would be okay for?
What do you mean, violent crime offenders that are potentially coming to the United States?
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah,
okay, so then we should just ban all men from immigrating to the U.S., and we've solved like violent crime immigrants and a lot of drug crime.
I've actually proposed that. But that's, obviously you have to look at this is an issue with like a lot of different qualities, right? People have a lot of different qualities that are valuable and are problematic, right? And to just look at like one quality and say that's the quality that we're going to account for, and we're not going to.
I totally agree, but you're making my argument for me now. So when I say immigration is a massive boon to the United States economy, even fiscally, and then you go, well, what about the crime? Why are we looking at that one factor when the crime is already lower than native populations?
I'm not saying, well, what about the crime? I'm saying look at this in a multifaceted way. Figure out what the best countries are to bring in people from, and then bring people in from those. Make a decision. Right now, the policy is basically just random, like whatever.
Wait, no, it's not. You don't get here randomly from the United States. We have a huge process to immigrate here. It's not random at all. We're very selective in our immigration.
Well, there's something called a lottery. Have you not heard of the lottery?
The lottery makes up a small percent. Okay, hold on. Okay, firstly, firstly, to get into the lottery, you already have to qualify to make that. It's not just random. I don't know if you think that like it's literally like, hey, this random dude from Chad is coming to the U.S. now because you won the lottery. That's not how it works. Okay, the lottery is already a system of people that have already qualified for immigration. Firstly, secondly, the lottery makes up like 1% of the people that immigrate here to the United States. Like.
Well, it's funny. I think that you've gone through the immigration. I assume you must have some experience with this since your wife is Swedish, right?
Something like that. What's your question?
Well, I'm saying that like I was going to ask anything. I was going to say I actually think that there is some kind of qualifications that people have to allowing people to immigrate within the system, right? Within the immigration system, because the immigration system is made up of people who work there and try to invite people in, right? And typically the people that go in and work for, the immigration office in any particular region, they're going to be the kind of people that are sympathetic to other certain kinds of people, right? They're going to be probably lefties. They're probably going to want to bring in certain kinds of people. And in my experience, they tend to favor people who are like potentially less valuable to the economy, potentially less valuable to the country, right? They want to bring in the people that seem to have the most, like the saddest story or something like that, right? And a lot of times this has to do with, refugee status, right? But refugee status isn't for people who are like low income. Refugee status is for people whose like literally their lives are in danger. But this system has been corrupted by the people who work in it to just bring in people that they want to bring in.
I don't think that's usually how applying for refugee status works. Like you have to go in through the UNHCR are the people that decide whether or not you get to apply for like asylum or refugee status, and then only a percentage of those people are even referred to the United States. It's like
there are a huge right. I mean, there's like a lot of people down the line that get to make these choices. But in my experience, it tends to be like the sad cases that get in. But these aren't necessarily the people that we want in America. I mean, look, I feel a great deal.
This is a totally different thing. We don't choose refugees based on who we want in America. These are because we feel like we have a social obligation to the world. Refugees aren't treated as...
Okay, the refugee system is completely and totally like fraudulent. Like the vast majority of refugees, it's fraud.
Wait, how?
Because people say that they've had a bad situation in the country that they're from, and they haven't. I've met tons of these people who just say, "Oh yeah, my refugee thing was total BS." I mean, maybe that's just an LA thing.
I know this is not true, so I'm just trying to find like a thing to.
Okay, you know that it's not true. All right, fine. You know that it's not true.
Okay, so you're saying that most refugees here are fraudulent?
Yeah. Most people who apply for refugee status, it's total fraud.
Okay, so here are the top 10 origin countries for refugees admitted to the U.S. from 2018. Tell me which one of these sounds like great countries that aren't like experiencing turmoil right now. So we have the Democratic Republic of Congo, we have Burma, we've got Ukraine, we've got Bhutan, Eritrea, Afghanistan, El Salvador, Pakistan, Russia, Ethiopia. Do these sound like countries that people are coming from where they're just making up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, look, I'm not saying every single refugee is making it up.
Well, you're saying like a good chunk of them, like at least 25% or something are.
A huge, I would say way more than 25%. I'd say probably like 75, 80%. Like an insane number of people who come from, like, look, there are certain countries who are like literally engaged in like a war, or, you know, they're experiencing a genocide or something like that. And then when that kind of stuff happens, okay, yeah, I'll accept that there's refugees that need to be dealt with in some way or another.
You understand that like getting into the United States as a refugee involves more vetting than probably any other type of immigrant that has ever been vetted in the entire world. Like,
yeah, but you don't.
From multiple organizations and agencies in the United States.
I agree with you, but I do think that they let people in knowing that they're lying a lot of the time.
So when you say they let people in, you're talking about the UNHCR lets people in, the State Department, meaning both the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI are letting people in. That
I think it's totally irrelevant what organizations you're talking about. I mean, the
I'm
name
just
of
saying
an
it's amazing to me that like
people, right? And those people have biases, and the people that
all
go into
of these people in this 2-year process of admitting refugees to the United States, all of these people are being biased. Do you think it's a coincidence that the 800,000 refugees that have been settled in the U.S., only one of those people have ever been committed of a terrorist attack, and it was an FBI sting? I'm
not making the case that illegal immigrants or refugees or something like that are a huge terrorist threat. I never made that. That's something that a lot of people say, but I don't really think that that's true at all. I don't think that's the reason that we should be concerned about refugees moving into the United States.
Okay.
I think I don't like fraud, and I think a lot of people don't like fraud. And I think that if you are coming from a country that is where you are used to corruption and you come into this country fraudulently, there's a good chance that you're going to act fraudulently while you're here. Like you're going to act in the same corrupt way that you acted in your home country. Like this is not going to be true of every person all the time, but it's statistically speaking, if you're bringing in people from a corrupt country, they're going to be more likely to be, involve themselves in more criminal type activity. And the people that are living here who aren't used to that kind of activity are going to be victimized by that.
Okay. So I'm just curious, just so I can look it up later. Where did you hear this number from, that this number of people, or like, have you heard this like talked about anywhere? That
completely made up out of nowhere.
Okay.
No, I'm not going to give you a specific number about, how many people I think are fraudulent on their refugee status. There's no way of knowing that. But just from talking to people, it's pretty obvious that almost all of the refugees that I've met from Russia are like, it's all.
Do you think that it's a problem to base like your worldview on statements like just from talking to people?
Screaming, I'll be here.
Potentially, but what you have to do is you have to be aware that it's possible that your experience is unique and unusual. I actually don't think my experience is unique and unusual. I do think that.
But you're basing that on your experience. Isn't that a little circular?
No, but I'll say this. If I had reason to believe that my experience was unique and unusual, like if I thought that the people that I was talking to were of a specific subgroup that didn't represent, most of the people coming in on refugee status, I could accept that this is an unusual experience. But like, what do you want me to just take your word for it?
Well, no, I mean, like typically if you have a viewpoint like this, you would have heard like a data point, or you would have heard like an article or a study, or somebody would say like, hey, like there's this massive percentage, rather than just assuming that like 70% of the refugees that are.
How do you get that? How do you get that study? How do you look at that?
I mean, I don't know. There are tons of like independent offices and oversight committees that look into both the UN or the United States in terms of their immigration process. You can look at the crime committed by people that have been resettled here as refugees. That's why I know that of the 800,000 or whatever here, that only one of them has been convicted of like a terror-related activity. I mean, there are tons of like oversight committees, especially with somebody like Trump in office. You don't think we would be hearing about this if there was evidence that this was happening?
Well, that's the trouble with people doing things fraudulently. I mean,
It's impossible to catch them. Do you think that like people that are immigrating here from other countries, so these are people that are both low IQ and incompatible with our culture, but they have like the intellectual wherewithal to be fraudulent to 20 different departments and then come here.
I think that the people coming in here on refugee status are oftentimes different than the people who are coming up here illegally.
Okay.
I think that the people who are coming on here in refugee status, but it's fraudulent, they're actually pretty smart, right? Hey, and you know what? At the end of the day, maybe let's take it. If they're that smart that they can get in, maybe let's keep them. But I in America, we have this this idea that we want the people who are doing things the right way to be able to get in. And look, the reality is, if people are clever enough, they're going to get in. It's not that the people who are trying to get in, it's not even that I blame them, really.
I mean, hey, it sounds like these are the types of people you want in. I mean, if they're able to be fraudulent to that many different people, these must be the best and brightest, right? So, I mean,
I would actually agree with that if I didn't think that a lot of the people that work within the immigration system are complicit.
Gotcha.
Right. I think they're helping them. They're looking at their file. They're saying this person is obviously lying, but you know what? I want to let them in anyway.
Okay, I would be very curious to ever see that like coming to fruition, but I guess we'll.
I mean, that's a kind of a radical accusation, but I think it's absolutely true.
Okay. Okay, and then I'm gonna throw a big curveball at you because I'm on two curveballs because I'm just curious. The first one, this is an easy one. Do you think the Jews are involved in like orchestrating any of this stuff?
No, I mean, I see all that stuff with the white nationalists and stuff like. I don't get that stuff, but
okay, that's cool. And then in the second thing, do you think that there's like a pretty strong racial component that contributes to the differences in IQ between like say black people or white people?
Okay, well that's not a curveball. That's an incredibly sensitive issue. I would say this. It's very, very difficult to make any kind of IQ assessment based on race just because there's so many stupid people of every group. And there's so many smart people of every group. I mean, you can go to any kind of, but there are IQ tests, international IQ tests that have been done that do show that there are differences. Yeah. But
do you think those differences are because of like genetics? Like even if we bring them over to our country and breed them?
Yeah, breed them. I do think that there's a genetic component to IQ. I think that's it like, to me, I would say this, right?
Mm-hmm.
White people don't have the highest IQ of all the different races, right?
We're the most creative, right?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about
that.
But I would say that if you have a higher IQ than average, why do you care? You're a smart person. Like, you should be fine. White people not being the smartest, and the same goes for every other group. Like, if like, okay, I don't know which group is like the least athletic, but let's say there's a least athletic group, right? If you happen to be like an Olympian and you're a phenomenal athlete, like, what do you care what the average is? It doesn't really matter,
Mm-hmm.
So I prefer to look at people on an individual level. But I'm not willing to just dismiss research that people are trying to do because there's some kind of taboo about talking about race and IQ, or whether women are good at one thing or men are better at something else. Like, I like this idea. I like this idea that some groups are better than others at certain things, and the fact that we hide from it, I think, is really a product of our fear of really just being, I think that a big problem that we have in our society is that politicians are afraid that anytime white people hear that white people are better at some other people, at something, that they're going to run, like I said, into their closet and grab their hoods and capes and start burning crosses on people's yards. I think that we need to have a little bit more respect for the intelligence of Americans, and the decency of Americans. You know, if one group has a high IQ and another group has, you know, is athletic, and another group is charming, and another group's good at acting, and another group's creative, or whatever it is, like, that's fine. Like, that's great. You study that, look at that, figure out why that is. You know, maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's a genetic thing, maybe it's I don't know. You know, I don't like the idea of taking things off the table for political correctness.
Okay. All right. Do you have any final comments or thoughts or anything?
Nope. That was absolutely delightful, though.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation, my dude. Have a wonderful day. All right. I'll see you later.
Thing. Yep. All right. Later on.
Yep. Bye. You've ever heard of a game called Portal?
I have heard of Portal, yes.
Okay. We have